was like Alexis's first week.
I think the traffic was completely stop and go
I don't think
from
we should.
Dearborn on.
Yeah, I think we should.
From the office said stop and go right.
Yeah, from
Because
my
everybody
home,
came
all the
early.
way
I think we should.
from my
Oh yeah, I'm sure from your house.
from Dearborn
Is that okay?
All right, did you
until
start,
you reach
did you start
696.
the recording?
Okay.
Okay.
That's what makes me nervous.
Okay, so we're trying out new technology here in this township call as well, because Rob said that now it will record, and he pushed the button, so hopefully it's recording. I think I'll just kind of waste a little bit of time while folks get in here. But we will try to get started. So my name's Jennifer Dixon, and I'm with Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, like up right here tonight, with the Air Quality Division. So I'm going to be helping moderate and kind of doing a little bit of the beginning part of the presentation tonight. So these guys here are going to hopefully be able to answer some of your questions a little bit later on. So we'll talk a little bit about how the meeting's going to run in just a minute. So how are things going to work tonight? So tonight we came to talk to everyone in person. On May 29th, we're going to be having a virtual meeting very similar to this one, but it'll be on the computer, as well as a hearing. Tonight we are not having a hearing, so I just want to make sure folks know that. We can accept comments tonight in writing. If you really want to give your comment tonight, I did bring some comment cards, so feel free to grab one. But again, one of the main things about tonight is you do not need to submit comments tonight. There's all kinds of different ways you can submit comments. Hopefully you all are here to just learn a little bit more about what's going on, ask questions of the panel. Hopefully we can provide some good information for you. So that's kind of our goal tonight. So what we're going to do is we'll do a little bit of a presentation. Mostly Janine's going to be talking, and I'm going to be talking. And then we'll get into like a question and answer. So if you can save your questions, write them down on one of those pads of paper that you picked up as we go along. If there's things that kind of trigger that, feel free to just jot those down. We are going to be using this microphone for questions. So we're going to have folks come and walk up to the microphone. If you have any issues with mobility, just let me know. I'm happy to come next to you and get your question and then announce it for the room. We just want to make sure everybody can hear all the questions that are had. So. And then after that, we'll go over a little bit more information about where you can find things, how you can make a comment if you'd like to make a comment, how you can get a hold of us if you have other questions. I'll also have a QR code. Who knows what a QR code is? I'm just making sure because my mom says nobody knows what that is. So we'll have a QR code if you want to register to attend the meeting next week to watch online. We'll have that at the very end too. So we're going to try to wrap up around 8 o'clock. But if you guys really have a lot of questions, we're happy to stay as long as folks want to. We're also happy to have some one-on-one conversations afterwards if that's helpful too. And then we'll let you go. So one of the things that we really like to talk about when we do our public meetings is these group norms. So this slide was developed with a group of advocates out of the Flint area. And it's just kind of set the stage about how we would hope that the meeting would go and how we'll kind of be chatting with each other. So of course we want you to listen and try to understand some of the things that we're talking about. But we also want you to ask questions. So if we're not getting you what you want or it's still not making sense, please make sure that you ask questions. Definitely criticize ideas. We understand sometimes people aren't happy with things, but definitely not people. So if someone is in here that you don't get along with, we want to make sure we keep things cordial and communicate respectfully. And then the last one is take space and make space. And basically what we want to do with that is making sure that everyone who has a question gets an opportunity to ask a question. So not having one person kind of asking all the questions and taking up all the time. And we just want to be respectful because we're all here hopefully to learn something. All right, so a little bit more about the agenda. We're going to have my staff are going to introduce themselves here in just a minute. Then we're going to get into that informational session. So like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about the background, why we're here today doing this enforcement action conversation, what that means. We'll talk about some of the details of the consent order. So it's pretty lengthy and it's a legal document. So we understand sometimes you read that, sometimes I read it and I go, I have no idea what that is. So we have some copies of it. Alexis had them out on the desk there. It's also online, so if you want a copy, please feel free to grab one, but that's going to be basically what that draft is what the county would be signing up for. So we'll talk more about that. Again, question and answer after that. How do you provide comments and getting more information? So that's basically the agenda. So you met me already. I'm gonna start at the end with Carolyn. So if you guys can just kind of go down, introduce yourself, let everybody know what you do for EGLE, for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Try not to use acronyms, because that'll get us in a bind. But go ahead, Carolyn.
My name is Carolyn Parker. I'm the district engineer in the Warren District Office of EGLE, the Materials Management Division. And I basically review construction permit applications and operating license applications for solid waste disposal facilities like landfills, transfer stations, processing plants. And I'll review engineering reports that come in relative to these facilities, and I also perform quarterly inspections at these facilities.
Yep, get close to the mics if you can. Sorry, Carolyn.
I think we have to like maybe pull them closer to us.
We're learning here because it's a new system, so
Yeah.
we're learning.
Okay. Well,
Just try testing.
Testing. Testing.
I think it's working.
It's working.
Okay. Should I
Go
read?
ahead, Robert.
No, I think you're okay.
Hi, so I'm Robert Joseph with the Air Quality Division. I'm an environmental engineer on our staff. I have several responsibilities for the district as well as statewide, but for our purposes here today, I'm also a member of the Landfill Work Group for the state of Michigan, and I also receive the air quality complaints received by the district. I'm sure I've talked to many of you before, so thank you.
My name is Irana Kananahali. I am an environmental engineer. I handle this landfill along with my other facilities.
Great. And Arana, you work in which division?
Air Quality Division, Southeast Michigan, Warren.
Great. My name's Janine Camilleri. I work out of Lansing. I'm the Air Quality Enforcement Unit for the, yeah, I said air quality, right? I'm the enforcement supervisor for our unit in Lansing, and our staff person, Jeff Rathbun, he was the enforcement specialist on this case. He's not able to be here tonight, but I was involved in almost every meeting with this case, helped to draft the consent order. So I'm working along with some multimedia enforcement action, so Air Quality Division and Materials Management Division work together on this enforcement action.
Good evening, I'm Greg Morrow with the Materials Management Division of EGLE. I am a solid waste supervisor in the Warren District that covers Southeast Michigan, so my staff handle solid waste inspections at landfills, including Smiths Creek Landfill, and engineering and monitoring reviews.
Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Darling. I'm with the Materials Management Division. I am the district geologist assigned to Smiths Creek, and ultimately I conduct inspections in terms of Part 115 rules and statute, and then am responsible for reviewing hydrogeological monitoring data and plans of the sort.
Okay, so that was a lot already, right? But now you kind of met everybody. We'll talk a little bit just around why we're here tonight. So what are we discussing? So the goal for tonight is to talk about the enforcement action. So we know that there's a lot going on with Smiths Creek Landfill that got us here. We'll talk a little bit about that background, but we want to make sure we're focusing our conversation mostly on the enforcement action, because hopefully that's what you all want to know about. Like these guys mentioned, this is an air quality and a waste enforcement action, so we work together, this team worked together to develop this with the county. They'll talk more about how that process works, because it's important to understand the enforcement process so that you can kind of understand how we got here. What is open for public comment? So that's a question we get a lot. So before we even get started about hearing more of the details, everything in the consent order is open for public comment. So if you have a comment on something, if you have a question on something, you can definitely submit that. Like I said, we're not doing a hearing tonight, but hopefully this information will at least get you to a place where you know what you might want to comment on, if you do want to make a comment. And why is the consent order needed? So the important part of the consent order is it resolves all those old violations and kind of puts the landfill on a compliance plan, and then it has a lot of other details that are in it that they have to adhere to. And it gives us another mechanism to ensure that they stay in compliance. So these guys are going to talk a lot more about that in just a minute. Mostly Janine, she's going to take us away here and right now. ready, Janine.
Yep, absolutely. We wanted to start off the conversation tonight just to give an enforcement timeline.
Get closer to your microphone.
Okay. I'm just going to talk louder. Okay, because we're all like this and it's kind of awkward. So this, and I think you all know more than us when this all started because you lived in the community and you were getting on your phones, filing complaints, calling Robert. So the timeline that we started to log a significant number of complaints was in September of 2023. And then we started doing investigations and inspections, Air Quality Division and Materials Management Division. And we issued our first violation notice in October of 2023. We continue to do investigations and basically go forth and working together to evaluate the landfill's compliance with air quality and materials management requirements. So from the time period of October of 2023 to July of 2024, we were issuing violation notices to the landfill.
Is that just for, I'm sorry, is that just for odors? What was the main violations for?
There were a variety of violations, and we're going to talk about each one of those. But they did start off, the initial violations were related to odors. And then we started to look at the root cause, why are we having gas odors in the community? And then we were investigating, looking at the gas collection and control system and looking at other parts of the landfill just to make sure that they were in compliance, the county was in compliance with the rules and regulations. So then we started to issue additional violation notices. We did, based on the, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button. Based on the significance of the violations and the number and the nature of them, we did decide to refer the county to the enforcement team, and that's when we started our escalated enforcement action in March of 2024. Shortly thereafter, we started having enforcement meetings with the county and explained to them that we were going to need to resolve these violations with a consent order where they would have to commit to a compliance program, which we'll talk about in detail, as well as pay a penalty for the violations. We did have a period of time you see on the timeline there where we did, from July to now basically, we were working on negotiations on the consent order. And now we're here in front of the community. We started the public notice and comment period on April 22nd, and it goes until June 6th. We have our first meeting tonight, and then we'll have our virtual public hearing on May 29th. We also just wanted to start with just a schematic and a visual of the landfill, just to kind of, start off with everybody having familiarity, which I'm sure you guys are somewhat familiar with, as well as our inspectors. I wanted to give a little bit of background on the enforcement process and let you know about the work that we do that kind of got us to this point tonight. So essentially, our role in the Air Quality Division as well as in the Materials Management Division is to conduct inspections and to respond to complaints. As we were doing that work with our district staff, in this case, we did determine that there were violations that were occurring at the landfill. We did cite those in violation notices, and the landfill did have an opportunity to submit a response to those violation notices, and we had that kind of back and forth where we were evaluating their compliance, they were responding to our violation notices, and we were determining if, based on what we were observing, if the landfill was going to get referred for enforcement. Ultimately, we did decide that they needed to be referred for enforcement, and we issued an enforcement notice. We did proceed to have enforcement meetings with the landfill, and now we're at the public comment period. So I'm not hitting the buttons properly.
No, I think you're fine.
Okay. So what we want to do now is give the community an opportunity to, ask questions tonight, to provide comments. We will be evaluating those comments and determining if there will be changes made to the consent order, and then at the end of this process, we will issue a consent order to the landfill that they will be required to follow. I wanted to talk a little bit about this contract that we have, and that's the consent order. And that's what it is. It's essentially a legal contract between two parties, really, EGLE and St. Clair County. And we have a legal process to resolve the violations that we alleged against the county, and we resolve those violations through the consent order. And that's why, you know, I think we said the consent order is pretty bulky. There's a lot of information here, but it's really important that we foundationally lay out all the violations and then have a commitment for the landfill to take corrective action. Some of those they've already done, others they're going to continue to do to ensure that they remain in compliance through the length of this order. And it also includes penalties as well as stipulated penalties for future violations. This is a legal contract that's also reviewed by our attorneys, and then it's signed by all the parties. We wanted to kind of lay the foundation before we talk about the enforcement action, just to first go over the violations at Smith Creek. Like I mentioned, we started receiving odor complaints from the residents in September of 2023, and then we proceeded to evaluate those landfill gas odors. And we did verify that they were off-site on multiple occasions by Materials Management Division and Air Quality Division staff. We also documented numerous nuisance violations based on our observations, and we issued violation notices to the landfill based on our observations. As I had mentioned earlier, because we were documenting these violations related to landfill gas off-site, we wanted to figure out why this was happening. So we evaluated their design of the gas collection and control system, whether they were maintaining it properly and operating it properly. And we did determine that there were violations related to the gas collection and control system. A lot of those violations are pretty technical, but we do have our staff here tonight to answer questions about them. But we documented quite a few violations of the gas collection and control system because we wanted to get to the root cause of what was causing the odors. We also documented in last summer that the sulfur remover system related to the supplemental flare wasn't working properly. So those are the main violations that we're resolving in the consent order. One key component of the consent order is a compliance plan. And so what a compliance plan does is it's a commitment by the landfill to make upgrades to the landfill to continue to ensure that they're complying with their materials management permit, with their air quality division permit, with our state and federal rules and regulations related to landfill management, as well as ensuring that they're not having nuisance odors leaving the boundary of the landfill. So it's really critical in this case that we work to negotiate a very robust compliance plan to make sure that when we came to you guys today that we could say, these are all the steps that the landfill has either taken or will take to prevent these violations from happening again. So that's kind of the intent of the compliance plan. There's a lot of requirements here. I'm going to kind of hit the high notes, but also in the enforcement summary report on page 5, it goes into a lot more detail on all the things that the landfill has done or will do that's required under this compliance plan. But the main things, is that they need to be able to control odorous emissions from the landfill. So they need to properly maintain and operate the gas collection and control system. They need to ensure that there's interim and permanent cover to make sure that those gases are not leaving through the soil and becoming fugitive emissions. They need to monitor their methane emissions at the surface and at the perimeter. And they're also agreeing to implement a perimeter monitoring plan, which we've already reviewed and approved. So we'll talk a little bit more about the perimeter monitoring plan in a little bit. Some of the other things, like I mentioned, they're subjected to air quality permits, their materials management license, so they need to comply with the requirements in those permits and license. They need to make sure, and they have also already installed landfill gas capture perimeter interceptor pipes, so continuing to make sure that they're capturing the gas and ensuring that it doesn't leave through fugitive emissions. That's really a critical piece to this. They need to prevent the release of landfill gas to the air when their engines are shut down. So this is also how they manage their gas collection and control system. and they need to make sure that they're operating that sulfur removal system that's tied to the supplemental flare properly. And all these things, basically, if they're done right, then we're not gonna see nuisance odors. They also need to make sure they're screening their waste for odors and that the sulfur content in their waste is acceptable. So these are kind of the main things that we negotiated, but I would also like to note that the landfill has also made upgrades that, you know, we found were pretty critical in addressing some of the problems out there. One of the things that they did is that they did install a horizontal, you might have to help me with this, the horizontal vertical well field that really helped to better manage the gas.
Yeah, I mean, I can touch on a few of the things. They installed, some of you may know, they installed an extra flare at the south end of the facility. That helps them. It has a separate vacuum source, so they can pull harder on the gas collectors in that area. They installed a additional gas collector that they call the interceptor trench in an area that was problematic for those gas odor emissions that were impacting the community. And they've done a lot of work on the vacuum system, and that was a key issue. There's pipes that are all throughout the landfill that provide vacuum from a large blower system to pull on these gas collectors, and that's how they get the gas out of the landfill. Some of those old vacuum pipes, they had sags in them, and they started to collect liquid, and so they had to be dug up and regraded, replaced in some cases. But those are the things that the landfill had been working on throughout us working on this enforcement process that seemed to be impactful, that seemed to help. Those are kind of the key items.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of this is pretty technical, but I think overall, the main purpose of all these upgrades is to better capture the gas so that we're not having fugitive emissions into the community. So a big piece of this compliance plan is also the perimeter monitoring plan that was negotiated as part of this settlement. And this is something that, you know, I really want to commend Smiths Creek Landfill and St. Clair County on coming to the table and agreeing to this perimeter monitoring plan. It's not a common requirement at landfills across the state. There's only one other landfill in the state that I know that is using perimeter monitors. So I think it was an important piece to this settlement along with those other upgrades that we talked about. But the purpose of it is so that if you do have monitors being placed in the right locations, that we can ensure that gas isn't leaving the site. So they're going to be installing 7 monitors that are going to measure for methane. And as part of this perimeter monitoring plan, there's what's called an action level. So if they're going to have these sensors around the landfill, and if it's over 50 parts per million of methane, then they're going to have to, that triggers a corrective action. So that's going to be a real critical part that they currently don't have. It's not just like we're collecting data, but there's actually a trigger to do something if the monitors are detecting methane emissions over 50 ppm. So that's another piece of this. I also wanted to mention, in addition to the perimeter monitoring, they're going to be doing surface emission methane monitoring, additional requirements beyond what's required by the federal regulations. So those two pieces are also a big component of the settlement to ensure that they're measuring methane at the surface level as well as along the perimeter. Wanted to talk a little bit more about the penalty. And so this was a multimedia enforcement action, as we discussed. So we have 2 divisions calculating a penalty in this case. And each division has their own statutory requirements around penalties as well as the different policies that we follow. So in this case, we looked at the penalty is calculated based on the violations that we alleged in the enforcement action. So the nuisance odor violations, the violations that we alleged related to the gas collection and control system, also the violations associated with the improper operation of the sulfur removal system. So it captures the violations that we alleged in the enforcement action, and there is a negotiation that occurs with the penalty. So this was the agreement that we could reach with Smiths Creek, and it's consistent with how we calculate our penalties across the state. And in addition to the upfront penalty that the landfill is required to pay, they also are subjected to stipulated penalties if there are future violations under the order. So the order is a 4-year order that they're going to be operating under it. So if there are violations, like I explained, all those compliance plan requirements, if they violate any conditions of the compliance plan in the future, they may be subject to stipulated penalties. And this is a big part of, why we're here tonight. It's the complaints that the community raised, and please continue. If we are here to respond to complaints. If you have concerns, continue to contact us. We will continue to respond to and investigate complaints, even after the consent order is issued. And if additional violations are warranted, we'll be issuing those violations. I wanted to talk a little bit about supplemental environmental projects. This is not included at this time in the enforcement action, but we have already received some citizen questions or comments about supplemental environmental projects. So just wanted to provide just a short overview if you've heard about them and wonder what they are. Sorry, I just got all tied up there. Supplemental environmental projects, they're a voluntary agreement between us and the party that's associated with the enforcement action. So the benefit to these projects is that they can be included in the enforcement action, where a portion of the penalty can be used for a environmental or public health project that the intent is to, address the concerns of the community or the environment or ecosystem who were affected. So it's not required, but it is something that can be included. And the nice thing about the supplemental environmental projects is that a significant portion of the penalty can be invested back into the community. So this is something that we, are considering with the county, and we understand that there are questions about supplemental environmental projects. Just to give a couple examples, we've done quite a few supplemental environmental projects at EGLE. Some of the ones that we've recently done with the Air Quality Division. We've looked at improvements in energy efficiency at facilities. We've planted trees to buffer pollution. A couple of schools, we've put in air filters, like schools that are near industry. We've put in filters at their school to improve the indoor air quality for the students and the teachers. Another one we've done is where there is a facility where they're collecting, monitoring data, but that data isn't being shared with the community, that we can do like a public website where that monitoring information can be shared with the community in real time. So those are just some examples of supplemental environmental projects. Again, it's something that the respondent or the violator in this case needs to come to us and propose. We can't require them to do it. It's a voluntary act, if you will. So we have been talking a little bit to the county about, the comments that we received. So just having further conversations about SEPs. Wanted to talk a little bit more about what's next. So like I explained, the public comment period ends on June 6th. We'll be responding and reviewing to comments. Everybody who submits a comment will receive the response to comment document that will lay out our evaluation of the comments, and will provide like a summary. And this will all occur after the public comment period. So after we receive the comments, we're gonna all talk about them. We'll work with our division directors to determine if there's any changes that are gonna be made to the consent order. We'll share that final response to comment document with the community members. In this case, because the county it's a municipality, and the board has to give approval to finalize the consent order, the board will be receiving a copy of the final consent order, and they will have to vote on whether they will accept it or not. So we'll have another board approval meeting before the consent order can be finalized. But once the consent order is final, then that decision and the response to comment document and all the information will be sent back out to the community. So
All
I
right.
think, hopefully I didn't go too fast. And really tonight is, we want to hear from you. This is the purpose of being here. We really appreciate everybody coming. And we have lots of time for questions. I know this is a lot of information, so.
Yeah, no, thanks Janine for walking through that. I see a lot of people taking pictures and trying to write stuff down. If you gave Alexis your email address, or if you get emails from me, do people get emails from me, Jennifer Dixon, you get my emails, at least some of you? Now you've signed your name, you probably get more, so sorry about that. We try to communicate about things going on at Smiths Creek as much as we possibly can. We can send this presentation out to folks. If you would like it, we're happy to share that. This is, it's all public information, so if that's helpful, I don't want you to be panicking that you didn't catch the information. So if you have an email and you would like it, we're happy to send that out. We'll just kind of send that out to folks that were here. But we are in the question and answer period, so again, you'll have to come up and ask your questions over here. I don't know if you guys all want to stand in a queue. That might be awkward or hard to stand, but if you want to kind of come up one at a time and ask questions, we're happy to do that. I'm just going to kind of moderate the questions if you all have them and make sure that we get to the right staff people here. So anyone want to be first? Okay, come on up.
Is there a time limit on the question?
Nope, so if you ask more than one question, I'll try my best to kind of parse them out. But as long as we don't have everyone wants to ask a question right now, feel free to ask a follow-up if you have one too.
Okay, so basically, it's a little bit of the questions, there's like three major questions.
Okay.
So basically, I live right on the doorstep of the landfill there. I'm right there on the corner of the entry. That's my house right there on the corner. And your timeline helped out a lot because 2023, we were looking at that house and we were like, okay, do we buy it? Yeah, we do a lot of fishing. I grew up in Marysville and St. Clair doing a lot of fishing with my grandparents. So we were looking to move out here. 2023, okay, yeah, we're going to buy this house. So we bought the house, no problems. Then all of a sudden we started getting into doing the yard work. And this is right after that 23 time when we bought it. We had to put a lot of work into it. And the odors were just, how could I say it? They were just trashy. I mean, it smelled like literally somebody opened up a trash can that's been sitting in the heat for 6 years, and they opened it up and it's just filtering right into the house. We couldn't even really do yard work. We stopped. And I think you had a representative, one of the air people came out.
Robert maybe or somebody?
I was somebody that came out, they met me there, I was cutting the grass, and I said, you can come out here anytime you want. You don't need my permission, you come out here anytime you want. And I said, what would you rate the smell? And he says, well, it's about a 3. And I'm thinking, about a 3? How do you gauge, according to your meters here, to this thing, the air quality index, what did it ever reach? And how do we know what level that actually reached to? Because there would be nights, everything would be fine, and all of a sudden you wake up and you just get this putrid stomach feeling like you're getting sick. And you can notice the odor, but it wasn't really bad. Then you go outside and it was terrible. That odor sort of subsided in the last year. That stinky, nasty is pretty much gone. But there's still another odor that's there. I don't know if that's a burn off or whatever that is.
Okay.
That's not really bad. It's not really putrid, but it's still there. To me, where I live there, it seems like when there's no wind, I smell it all the time. West wind, not so bad. Sometimes it just depends if it hits the east, the east and the west winds. And then in the future, you said you're going to put these things up to monitor. I don't know how you're going to be able to do that because if there's no wind, the smells just generally stay there and they drift. And they just drift like fog. They don't go nowhere. And sometimes when there's no wind, that's when you get the most parts of the odors. So I don't know.
Well, do you care if we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, go right ahead.
So you grab the magnet, thank you for doing that. So that's something completely different than our odor scale. So what
Okay.
that is like, if the air outside, generally speaking, so think back to when we had the wildfires. Lot of smoke, really bad air quality, that's what that is gauging. Doesn't
Okay.
have anything to do with the landfill, it's like your general outdoor air
Okay.
quality. So if you go on your phone, on your weather app, you'll see like the AQI, that's your air quality index. Orange or above, bad.
Right.
Right? But talking about how we look at odors and how we measure odors, we do actually have a scale that we use. So I'm gonna have Robert talk about that in just a second. But
Okay.
we do actually have a scale that we use, so he can kind of talk about how we do that. That's why you got the 3. So it's a 3 out of 5. 5 is the highest that
Okay.
scale goes, so I'll have him talk about that. But I do wanna say, like Janine just mentioned, if you are still experiencing odors that are bothering you, please call us.
Well,
Don't
it's not
feel
that the-
like
yeah, it's
you
not
have to
that-
like sit in it.
Yeah,
or-
it's not that they're really
Yeah.
bothering, it's, number 2 things, where I'm getting just to my final,
Sure,
I don't know if it's a
yep.
question or not, but it's, I had a family over for Christmas,
Okay.
okay? And we're sitting there talking. And me and my wife like, well, you know, we might not have much of a will, but we have this house, so when we go, either one of the kids, the kids can take it over, or, you know, sell the house and go from there. And my one son, he's like, well, I wouldn't live in this place. I can't stand that odor. And the odor wasn't even really that bad for us, because I don't know if it's we're used to it. But like, even if I were to go to sell that house, and this is where it triggers me the most, if I were to sell that house, I literally have to do it on a wind direction day. And that, if I would have knew I had to do that, I know common sense tells you shouldn't buy a house on a landfill, I get that. But I didn't think it was gonna be to this extent. Now, I don't know what happened to the reason why, because it was never like this bad. When
Yeah.
I drove through the neighborhoods, I did some yard work for people out here, it wasn't that bad. And then all of a sudden, it got terrible, and it got terrible in a hurry. And it, like I said, that putrid smell is pretty much gone, I don't get that as bad. I get the other carbon smell, and then over the weekend, I smelled a chemical smell. And I don't know what that was, but it was definitely a chemical, because you could feel it around your lips. It wasn't really bad, but it was something there. And it was coming right from the backyard. You know, my backyard is a railroad track, so there's not much distance there. The only thing I didn't do is I didn't write down the wind directions, which I should have done, but I know the wind was blowing because we've been having nasty weather all winter here, so it's really hard to gauge, you know, that. But that's basically where my problem sits. I get it that you're gonna give them a fine, and I get it that they're gonna do things to help the community out, which is fine. But there's people that own houses, and that if they were to go make a move, I don't even think I would be able to get the investment out of that house now
Yeah.
that I put into it. And I think it's, you know, it's not because of what I did to it, it's because if I don't sell that house, and I don't even know what kind of person I would be selling that house to somebody when the odor's not there. I don't even think I would do it, honestly. But yeah, that's my main concerns,
Okay.
and I've gotten your emails plenty of times.
Okay,
And
sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good, that's fine, I definitely appreciate it, but those are some of my main questions.
Yeah,
I
no.
have noticed a difference, I
Okay.
have, so I want,
Well, you poked fun at yourself a little bit, like who buys a house by a landfill, but a lot of people do, so
Yes.
don't like feel like that
Right.
was something, you know, bad. A lot of people do
Right.
that. That, again, I just want to say that if you're experiencing odors,
Mm-hmm.
it, just because you live by a landfill doesn't mean that you should
Okay.
be impacted by that. So definitely give a call. But I do want, Robert, for you
Okay.
and for like everyone else, to kind of talk about, you know, what do our air quality inspectors do when we go out? We do use this scale, and it's very much so that we're looking at things almost like in a weirdly like equitable way, so that we're assessing these odors the same way when we go out, so that when we do issue these violations, it's for a reason, right? So, do you mind, Robert, just kind of talking about the scale and what you do because Robert gets most of the complaint investigations, although he was out for a little while on paternity leave, so we did have some other folks from that office taking over, but he does the majority of them.
Okay, so as some of you may know that when I've spoken to you regarding these complaints, we have a 5-point scale that we use when we come on site, right? So 0 is considered non-detect, 1 would be considered just barely detectable, 2 is considered a distinct and definite odor, 3 is considered a distinct and definite objectionable odor, 4 odors are strong to cause one to avoid it, overpowering, let me repeat that. 4 is odors so strong causing one to avoid it, overpowering completely, and then 5 is more severe than 4. I don't remember the exact wording of 5 off the top of my head. I know I've explained it to many of you when I've spoken to you, but 5 would be the maximum on our scale, causes one to avoid the odor one and not want to be outdoors. So when we come on site, we have it, we bring an odor survey form, and what that survey form is, we go upstream of the source, of the alleged source, and then downwind, so upwind and downwind. The regulations are written as such that when we conduct our investigations, we maintain the human element, right? Because we don't come out with any sophisticated equipment that requires calibration. We just use our noses, right? Because like you're out in the yard, you want to be able to smell what we're smelling and vice versa, right? Because some odors, and we're talking about landfill gas, like hydrogen sulfide, it's a heavy gas, so it sinks. It doesn't, and it explains what you detect when you're out doing your yard, right? Where when there's no wind, it's just settling in those pockets. And then when that sun comes out as energy source, it might rise and move around. And that's that's maybe when you smell it, when things are kind of calm, when that sun comes out, that's when the strongest. And as the day goes on, it lifts up. The air at ground level rises, and then the air above it displaces it and comes down. So we have what's called vertical mixing, and maybe you don't smell it as much later on in the day as you would maybe early morning. So back to when we do our investigations, we come on site, we go upwind and downwind to the alleged source, and we kind of verify based off the characteristics that you provide to us when you give the complaint. And based on our experience and our training, we assess if it's a 0 to 5. Now, what our protocol is, it has to at least be that level 3, which is distinct and definite objectionable odor. One to be causing unreasonable interference with one's comfortable enjoyment of life and property. So if you're outside doing yard work, that would be, it's interfering with your comfortable enjoyment of your life. You're outside walking your dog or having a barbecue. So we come on site and we want to be able to look at intensity, duration, and frequency. Now, we know what intensity is, right? Because that's what I referenced in the scale, 0 to 5. The frequency is how often is it happening, right? How often are you detecting it? Is it, once every 5 minutes? Is it once every, 2 minutes? And then the frequency is, duration. So the frequency, how often it's happening, and then duration, how long is the odor lasting? Are you smelling it for 10 seconds every minute, 10 seconds every 5 minutes? So I think when we look at those, intensity, I think, is the biggest one, right? Because if you smell an odor that's, let's say, a level 3, 4, 5, and you're smelling it throughout the hour, that's going to cause you to want to avoid it. If it's an odor that maybe you smell for the duration of 5 minutes, but it's very strong and you're out there for the entire hour, you may be like, okay, it's bad, but it's gone now, I can continue my work. So when we look at the odors, it's always intensity, I think, is a big one to me when I'm on site. And then how often is it happening? Because even if it may only last for 10 seconds, the duration, if it's happening every 5 minutes and you're out there for an hour, that's enough for you not wanting to be out there. So we take our odor survey form, we are on site maybe. Typically, we like to at least be on site for up to 60 minutes to get a good idea. And we kind of whenever we smell these odors, at maybe 5 minutes, every 2 minutes, we document it on our odor survey form. And based off of that, if we have enough 3, 4s, and 5s, and I have to believe, I'm assuming you probably met our audit team. You might have met Mike or Gina.
Yeah, he was a young fellow.
Yes, so
He
came outside. So if you're smelling, in most cases, if you're smelling at least at 3, 4, 5, so are we. So when we assess that, if we're getting 3, 4, and 5s during the course of our investigation, that would warrant a violation notice to be issued to the landfill. So I know I kind of spewed out a lot here to you and kind of gave it to you.
No, that's good. No,
but
thanks for
I
doing
don't know
that.
if you have a follow-up, follow-up
There was
questions.
one other thing that he mentioned that I think is worth talking about too, just for everyone. One of the things that you mentioned was it was on a weekend. So as you probably know, we're not in the office on the weekends like most people, but we do have a pollution emergency number. If you're smelling odors on the weekend, we would encourage you to use that number and still call us and let us know. Robert will work on the weekends if he needs to. Our other staff will. So we try to get people out there. We don't always right away, but we'll definitely follow up with you. That's a really important part of our job. And like Janine said, even now once this is finalized and we go through this, this whole timeline process, if you're still smelling it, a lot of times people feel like I shouldn't call, or I don't want to bother someone, or it'll go away, or whatever. Don't give yourself an excuse not to call us. It can be fatiguing when you have odor concerns to continue to call. We understand that from working with communities. that it can be tiresome, like, I don't want to call again, I don't want to call again, or it feels like things aren't moving forward. This right here, why we're here tonight, is why we encourage people to continue to call. We can't resolve issues like this if we don't have enough evidence to do so. So, again, just want to encourage folks to call. Any other questions on kind of what we just talked about here? Maybe that's a good direction to go, and if not, if there's any other questions. You'll have to make your way up to the microphone, I'm sorry. Next time, we're going to get a little, travel microphone for Rob to have here at the township. That will be, and then I'll scurry around, but I would probably trip and fall, which has happened before.
Hi, I'm Sandy.
Hi, Sandy.
From Wales Township. I might have a couple more questions after
That's okay, yeah.
discussion. But one of my questions is EGLE now the overseer for the entirety of the contract until 2040 or 4 years due to the consent? Because right now we don't have an overseer. Obviously, there's been so many problems that haven't been taken care of. And now I'm just wondering, are you going to be overseeing this for the entirety of the contract for the landfill, for the bioreactor?
So, Greg, I don't know if you want to talk, are you speaking about the license or the consent order?
Right,
'Cause
right now
it's
that
a
you're
little bit
kind of
different.
overseeing everything right now, that there's problems that have been brought to your attention. So I'm wondering, after the 4 years, due
Oh,
to
I
the
see what you're saying.
consent, who's now going to oversee? Are you going to continue that for until 2040, I believe is when the contract ends? Or after 4 years, you're just going to wait for the residents to call?
Yeah, so Janine can talk a little bit about the consent order and how it doesn't just expire after 4 years. There's, certain criteria that they have to meet. And then I'm not sure what the 2040 date is, but Greg, if you want to speak to that a little bit.
No, I'm not sure what the 2040 date is, but I guess what I would like to say is that EGLE, we have permits, both air quality and materials management division permits for this landfill. And so we have a kind of a regular involvement with inspection, and that will continue on beyond the end
For
of
the
the
life of the
consent
landfill,
order.
right?
Right, so as long as the landfill's operating and even after it closes, we have an obligation under state law to conduct regular inspections. So it's not, we're not only involved for the term of the order. Whenever that ends, we will still be coming out here and doing our regular inspections and trying to ensure that the site stays in compliance.
Okay, because I noticed on one of your first pages, you said don't mention names, let's talk about the consent. But, I'm kind of new to the subject, so I'm still learning. I don't live in this area, but guess what? I live in St. Clair County, so it does affect me. So I'm wondering who failed here? Who failed the community? And that's why I'm trying to make sure that now that we're trying to find some resolution to this problem, that this will be an ongoing, everybody's going to be involved to make sure this doesn't continue to happen.
Yep. No, I think
So
you're
that's
on the
my
right track.
huge concern.
Yep.
Don't just drop after 4 years.
Right,
You know what
right.
I'm saying?
Can I add just one thing there too? I mean, there are certain requirements that will be part of this consent order that won't live beyond the order, but certain plans that are submitted under this order for EGLE approval can be carried forward. So, and we can reference those plans in any future permits and licenses. So we're gonna have to look at what things we can carry forward through any future permitting or licensing of the facility to make sure that these corrective actions that they have to take under the order, continue to live beyond the order.
Yeah, it's a good point. They don't just stop when the order is done. They don't take the equipment out or anything like that.
And we can't assume anything,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's why I'm just asking.
No, you're good. Did you mind if I have Janine just talk?
Let me clarify here. This consent order is there to resolve the violations that we have issued. And this has a life. But this consent order incorporates certain regulations and also air quality permits. We call it a renewable operating permit. That exists and that continues.
Yep.
And that needs to be renewed every 5 years. Even after the consent order expires, they have to comply with the regulations and the operating permit. Under the materials management, they still have to comply even after this expires with the license that they have been issued.
So the
Yeah.
license that was issued is not new. This is something that's been in existence. They
Yes.
just didn't follow through with it, creating the violation. Is that how I'm understanding this?
Yeah, I mean, that it's violations of, not necessarily the license, but the regulations
Right.
that they need
Yeah.
to adhere to. So, I mean, the odor emissions themselves are violations, but the cause of that,
Yeah.
the failures of their gas collection system, the vacuum to pull the gas out of the hill and burn it off at the energy plant, that's really that's really what the order focuses on, because there were portions of those systems that failed.
That's why upgrading that infrastructure was such an important part of this compliance plan.
Right, so a lot of that work has been done, but there's quite a few items in this compliance plan, once this order is entered, that we still hope to see additional improvements. But, the key will be making sure that those new systems or those improved systems are maintained
Yes.
so that they don't fail again, causing the same issue. So I guess that's,
Yep, it's gonna
that's
be
the goal here.
ongoing commitment to ensure that the upgrades continue to operate as they should. Landfills are pretty dynamic, and there's just a lot that you have to make sure is working properly. So the rules and regulations, they don't go away. They've always been there. And the order also doesn't automatically expire. So if the landfill is in compliance with all the requirements in the order, they can request a notice, they can request through EGLE to terminate the order. But if there are violations or non-compliance concerns, then, then it doesn't get automatically. So there's a review process that we will, EGLE will work through to make sure that the landfill is in compliance with the consent order before we terminate it.
Okay. And according to the violation that was on October 10th and 18th from 2023, I just want to clarify this, that the Rule 901 violation is further corroborated, however you say it, guys, by high methane concentrations up to, you had a reading of 45,752 ppm at M13. It should have been 500 ppm or lower?
Oh,
Is this,
So.
is this what the reading was 45,000?
Robert, you can go ahead. You have information.
Okay, so just to clarify, are you saying the ppm was at methane or hydrogen sulfide?
Methane concentrate according to your own violation.
So I
So it was
believe,
45,000 and it should not be above 500.
Correct.
Am I reading this? Because this is crazy.
I don't know the exact wording of that,
Yes.
VN, but yes, if referring to the methane concentration, it should not exceed 500 ppm above background, yes,
And
at
And
the
it was
surface.
45,000.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was with the
Did-
surface emission monitor. So that's at the surface. Our other coworker was walking
Right,
around
yeah.
with a SEMS 5000.
Yeah, Mike Kovalchuk.
Yeah.
And
So-
according to, I don't like this newspaper, but Detroit Free Press, right? They got a hold of FOIA, and I don't want to leave it a lack conversation here, but according to them, the company that runs the landfill, they claim that you guys read it wrong because you had a cone on the end of your monitor. I'm just
Okay.
like flabbergasted that we have this company running this landfill that could be detrimental to this county, and they're proving that this is what's happening. So I'm wondering, now they're making excuses. Can you explain that to me?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the article, but, so the surface emission monitoring that occurs, and the landfills are required to do it. We're kind of going around and evaluating if they're being done properly. That being said, the cone that we use, when we do our evaluation, it's not required for landfills to use this cone. So just to be clear, there's probably they're probably, I'm not speaking on behalf of them, but, we're trying to, we use the cone because we want to be able to, the cone helps us in figuring out where the emissions are coming from. So if we see distressed vegetation, or like, I don't know, sometimes I think the ground can be like a different color, because we're trying to figure out where is this gas coming from. So the cone is really helpful in that. However, the federal regulations do not require the cone. And that's what we are applying or following. So, so just to be fair on that one. But yes, we have been doing these audits, and we did find extremely high methane readings, which was very concerning to us, and it was included in the violation notice.
So there's one other thing about that might be helpful. So when Janine is talking about the surface emissions monitors, that's like on the top of the landfill. It's not outside where the people live, work, and play.
It's walking in the landfill.
It's walking on the landfill. So
Yeah, they
it's,
gave an estimate of how close you were to certain sites.
Yep, and it can be very different. Like we talked about, what this gentleman had his questions, the landfill gas, it tends to be heavier. We don't expect that it's moving outside, but when we do see that, those kind of high numbers, we know that's an alert for us. But again, it's not outside of the perimeter. That's where those perimeter monitors are going to help, because they will trigger that action level if they go over the 50 parts per million. And now we're talking a lot about, parts per, but there is that action level, which is why that perimeter monitoring system is going to be a really important part of this plan. So two different things though. So like something that's around it, what they were doing with the 45,000 and the we call it a SENS. When we walk around, that's just on the surface of the landfill. And the idea of that is to show where there's issues.
But it should not have been over 500 regardless of where you took that reading, correct?
I'm not sure about that.
So-
but
so
The
the-
500 is the action level.
Yep.
It's not really a violation.
That's right.
But there may be some crevice or path in the landfill.
Yep.
Gas started leaking, and that's why at that location it was 4,500. But that doesn't mean it's everywhere 45.
45,000.
Yeah.
45,000.
Yeah.
So we detected that. Yes, they challenged that we shouldn't be using the cone, but the regulations don't require that we should use the cone. That is their basis.
Yeah, I'm not arguing
Yeah.
about the cone.
No,
If
you're
you're
fine.
getting a reading, you're getting a reading that's is crazy amount. I mean,
Right.
I just wanted to clarify that, because I'm like, it's stating this here in several different things that I'm reading, and yeah.
Hey, Jen, I know we're kind of using some technical terms. I just wanted to, does everyone kind of know what a part per million is? If, to give you an idea what a part per million is, I guess the best representation would be like if you take 4 drops of ink in a 55-gallon drum. That's kind of 1 ppm. So 4 drops of ink in a 55-gallon drum is kind of considered as a visual for what 1 ppm is. So that's all.
But this hydrogen sulfide, you can smell at 10 or 15 parts per billion, not a million. Billion.
So in other words, he's saying it has a very low odor threshold. Some compounds, they have to have a high concentration for you to smell it, not for hydrogen sulfide. It can be very tiny, as like when you take it in your yard, and it can be overpowering to you.
If I could also add really quick about the surface emission monitoring. So they are going to be doing more monitoring that's required under the order. So
They
that's-
will be.
Yes. Yes, they will be. And they already are, they have been doing, they do it on a quarterly basis, the surface emission monitoring. They're going to be doing additional monitoring with a drone as well. So one of them is like with a human walking around with a device. The other one is with a drone. And the drones can be very effective too, because they can kind of, it's just another way of checking to make sure that the surface emission monitoring is done the right way. So they'll continue, they are doing those, and they'll continue to do them. And I just also want to be clear that under the federal regulations, if you are over 500 ppm, it is not a violation. It only triggers that landfills have to take additional corrective actions. So,
Is that helpful? A little more, like it's more information. Wait. Hold on one second, sorry.
Obviously,
Yeah.
the people that are, the company that
The
are
county.
running the.
The
right.
county, yep.
yeah.
But
Well, that's why I
where
was
we-
wondering if there's somebody gonna oversee.
But that is where we come in. So that's
Yes.
like part of our oversight is making sure that all
Okay.
those plans, everything that they're doing, those corrective actions are all like double checked by our inspectors. And that's part of our process when we do our landfill investigations.
Right,
So,
okay.
yep.
To me, less government's always better,
I
but
know,
when there's
yeah.
problems, right?
Right, right.
There's gotta be a little bit of oversee to an
Yep.
experiment. If somebody is doing an experiment at my house, I would expect, a little bit of. So the other thing, the last thing, sorry to take up
No,
so much
you're
time.
totally fine.
So the bill, Senator Phil Pavlov actually introduced a bill that was law back in 2011 to fast track this experiment here in St. Clair County. One of the things that they did was they took away the second liner for any type of landfills. And I'm understanding that the second liner was never placed under the bioreactor. Is that correct?
So that's maybe something Greg can talk about.
And why
Or-
wouldn't they place a second liner under the bioreactor?
That was about the time that this whole talk about bioreactors came up. I'm not quite certain, but I do know they did later establish that that second line was not needed. They said they had considered the situation and realized they did not need a second liner.
They stated that because they claimed that there was, I believe, 7 inches of clay. Oh, no, I'm sorry. CTI is relying on 10 inches of clay under the landfill acting as a natural liner.
You mean 10 feet of clay?
No, it says 10 inches of clay. And then according to your consent order, and this, I had a question about this, 1.11, it states, almost on the 5th sentence down, EGLE cited R299.448 due to severe erosion of the clay cap in areas of certified closed area. I'm concerned not only of the air, but what is going in the ground, especially when you're deleting the liner that in all this time we thought would be very necessary for landfills. And now you have an experiment that we're doing here, and now you've said, okay, we're gonna pass a law to make it easier because they claimed it was too expensive, and you deleted the liner below the bioreactors. Are you checking on that? Who is checking on this?
Let me talk about a couple things there. So there still is a liner system. It's not that, like you said, the law was changed related to the bioreactors, that it didn't require the second liner. So there still is a liner, it's got plastic, it's got compacted clay. I think that is a typo on the 10 inches or a mistake, because all municipal solid waste landfills in Michigan, anything that's been built since 1993 has to have the plastic liner system, has to have compacted clay, and the only way that a landfill can get out of having the second liner system is if they can prove through soil investigation that they have at least 10 feet of clay, solid clay underneath the liner system. So I'm not trying to say that
Even if it's a
alleviates the second
typo,
liner.
I get it, even if it's a typo though, you are stating here that you cited due to severe erosion of the clay cap in areas.
Right, so
that's
that's-
where my concern comes
Yeah.
in. If the law was passed stating that you only need one liner, and we know that there's only one liner in very important parts of this facility, shouldn't we be concerned about that now that we know that there is erosion happening?
Yeah, that's why it was cited. So the clay cap is different than the liner. So when we say liner, we're talking about what they put underneath the waste, where all the liquid collects that they have to pump out. The cap is what they put on the top cover of the waste once they're done filling in that area. So those violations were identified. There's an old closed area of this landfill that they finished filling. Based on when it was permitted, they only had to put a clay cap on it. They didn't have to put the plastic cap on it. And so our inspector, identified that as an issue. And the issue with the erosion of the clay cap is that once an area is closed, it needs to stay under the cap so that you don't have continued, rainwater getting in there and creating more leachate that you have to pump out of the bottom. Because your concern about the groundwater is that it's like the liquid that collects at the bottom needs to be on a liner system and it needs to be removed. So it's two different things, but we did identify that they need to do a better job of maintaining the clay cap on the closed area. But that's different than the 10-foot clay, natural clay underneath the landfill.
Yeah, Janine has the diagram. Did you grab one of those, Sandy? Because it might be helpful. That's why we brought those. I know it's kind of a,
This is for the bottom and this is for the top. But
Okay.
It's all kind of the same word, so it can be kind of confusing.
But also, I just want to assure you that the groundwater, the entire landfill is surrounded by a network of wells to monitor the groundwater. And our geologist reviews all the data for that to see if there's any indications that, the liners are leaking. So we do have, the state laws do have a very good, system in place for monitoring for leakage from those liner systems. So this site, Smiths Creek Landfill, has not shown any indication that the landfill liners are leaking, which is good, because not all landfill liners, are that way. Some sites we have leaks, but this site's liner system appears to be functioning well.
And when you have a leak, so how do you know that you have a leak?
Well, it's looking at, it's sampling the groundwater. There's a whole monitoring network of parameters, different chemicals that we have to look for. So we find out what type of chemicals are in the landfill leachate, the liquid that seeps down through the waste. And then we need to compare, is any of this stuff showing up in the groundwater? And there's a whole list of chemicals in the state rules that say what the minimums are that they have to test for. And so then the geologist looks for trends to see, are any of these chemicals, are they going up in concentration that would indicate that there's a leak from the landfill?
Yeah, and I can add to that too. So ultimately, when they installed the monitoring wells, so there's 15 wells surrounding the landfill. So when they installed them, they're digging a hole, they're boring through. So we have those bore logs. So until you reach the aquifer, there's 60 to 70 feet of low permeability, meaning that tightly packed particles, 60 to 70 feet of clay underneath the landfill. And then in terms of monitoring parameters, they submit reports quarterly. We're looking at inorganic constituents, we're looking at heavy metals, and then primary and secondary volatile organic compounds. And then we also know the composition every quarter. They're testing the leachate, so you can kind of compare, and then groundwater to the leachate, and then on top of that all the parameters are ran through statistical models, and we don't have to get into that, but it's a way to flag something. If I'm reviewing data, and maybe it's just a slight trend that to my eye, if it was if I was just reviewing it, it might not look super significant, but running it through statistical models that take into account years and years of cumulative data, it may flag one of those models.
Okay, I appreciate it.
yeah. No, this is great questions, Sandy. We appreciate that you took the time to ask all of them. Bob, are you next?
I think so.
Okay, come on up.
You guys wanted to ask a question too, right, sir? Yeah, they want to ask a question too.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm St. Clair County Commissioner Robert Felix for the 5th District, which includes Kimball and its landfill. I do have a bunch of questions that residents had sent to me that they're not able to be here tonight, and I will get to those after the other members have a chance to ask their questions. I just wanted to take a minute and thank Supervisor Usakowski for arranging for this, and I want to thank this team from EGLE. I've worked for 40 years as an engineer and a director of engineering, environmental engineering, and never have I worked with a better team than these folks here. I know many of them through countless phone calls at all different hours of the day and night. I felt so inspired by their work that I wrote a letter to Phil Rue, the director of EGLE, commending this team. And if you feel so inclined, I think they would appreciate a round of applause. That being said, there's questions about the landfill. A lot of them, EGLE is able to answer them. A lot of them, I will be answering. I am your county commissioner. I was sworn in January 2nd. I replaced Jeff Boehm, who was here 20 years and is in large part responsible for the problems we're facing right now. I'm working diligently on correcting them. Myself and the other 6 commissioners don't always see eye to eye. I see I'm the only county commissioner here tonight. I'm going to need everybody's help in this community to get this problem fully aligned and back to where our community has minimal risk. So I will be contacting you. I'm on Facebook. I'm on the county website. Come to the commissioner meetings on the first and third Thursdays of the month. Also, if necessary and things get critical, my wife and I will be knocking on doors around our community to let you know what's happening. But as I say, I have further questions. You need to realize that a lot of what these people can and can't do are dictated by state law and also staffing requirements. So they're answering questions that they can and can't control. The rest of them are going to be up to the county commissioners, and that would be me. So I will be back up later with questions. Thank you, and thank you all for coming tonight.
Thanks, Bob, appreciate it. Other folks had a question? Do you mind coming up to the?
Go ahead.
Oh, you gotta wait, Rob, just if you don't mind, sorry. We have no cutting, remember, we're being respectful.
All right, my name is Matt. I live on Smiths Creek Road. I'm about a mile west of the landfill. And me and my wife, we personally don't smell the landfill at our house very often.
Okay.
We do, however, drive past the landfill at least 2 times a day, sometimes 4, maybe even 6 occasionally. So what you generally smell is once you're past it heading east, it's like, because the wind with us comes from the southeast, everything kind of blows this way. So we generally don't smell it until we're past it, but I go past his house a bunch of times a day. I feel pretty bad for what he's dealing with. But I'm smart enough to know that just because you're not smelling it doesn't mean it's not in the air. Something's in the air that's polluting you. So I guess the overall question I have is, so is there any studies that have been done? Because like short term, you just smell it, you don't like it, you don't want to deal with it, you want it gone immediately. You can get on with your life. It's not like you're getting sick or anything. But long term, 15, 20 years down the road, is there an elevated cancer? Is there elevated tuberculosis? I mean, do we got to worry about things like that? Is there websites, or do you post findings on landfills that have these issues? I'm guessing our landfill with the reactor is not every landfill across the state or the country has that reactor. So I'm guessing it's an elevated risk with those numbers that we talked about earlier. So is there higher risks to the community?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I'm gonna just start out right now that we don't have any of our toxicologists or anyone here that can probably more adequately answer your question. Like Janine said earlier, landfills are dynamic. They're all different. There is a lot of studies around landfills. Specific health studies for people who are generally upwind. I don't know specifically if there is one or not. We can definitely get you some more information on that. Like I said, there's lots of studies on different pollutants and how they impact people. There's lots of, it's going to depend, again, on what our toxicologists will say. Every person is different. You all have different sensitivities, so what might impact you or your wife there might be different than your neighbor, right? I think we all kind of understand that, but definitely can get you some more information about that. We can look and see. I thought we had something on our Smiths Creek webpage that did go a little bit in that direction, but we can definitely find something. Did you give us your email out there? Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
we did.
Yeah, we can send it out to the group. It's a great question, and we just didn't necessarily think to have
Yeah,
one of our
'cause-
toxicologists here.
We're dealing with other issues where we're at, and it's like I said earlier, just because you're not smelling doesn't mean something's
Right.
not bad in the air. And I'm smart enough, I think we're all smart enough to figure that out. But when we do smell it, yeah, it's certainly, it's like he said, it's
Yep.
not pleasant. And we're generally driving down the road, so you get it for a minute. He's
Well,
getting
and the
it all
good
day,
thing
every
about
day.
landfills, in a way, not trying to say there's a lot of good things about landfills, but the good thing about landfills is that they're big, they're well-studied, the pollutants that come off of them, we know a lot about. So, we talked a little bit about methane, we talked about hydrogen sulfide. Those are two pollutants that we know a lot about. So we can definitely get some information. Like Robert mentioned, hydrogen sulfide, you can smell it at really low concentrations, not at concentrations where it's going to impact you. So when we first started getting these kind of elevated complaints, more complaints back in September of 2023, I think a lot of you probably know we did do a limited air quality study out there. The purpose of that was to see if there was anything that the community should be really concerned about. So we did work with the State Department of Health and Human Services on the numbers that we were getting. Now, again, very limited study, nothing long-term for years and years, but out of that study, we didn't find anything that would have been of a health concern. So, not that there wasn't levels, not that people didn't smell it, they definitely did, but.
So is that like present time?
Yep, that
Do
was-
those studies look down the road? I mean,
No, that would have been at that time. They did look to see, some of the assessment that they did was looking at, if you had this in your life for a certain period of time, and don't quote me on it, because I'm sorry, I'm not gonna remember exactly what that was, would we expect it to have long-term health effects on people? And the conclusions that they made were that short and long-term health effects, with the exception of 1 day or 2 days, like a very small, they didn't expect that would have health impacts from hydrogen sulfide. That was specific to that. So, I can point you to the webpage too where that is, so if you want to look at that a little bit more, it might be helpful.
Yeah, okay.
And then we can definitely share any other information that we have too.
Okay. So now, when you said about the monitoring,
Mhm.
I thought I caught that right. Is the landfill monitoring itself?
So the perimeter monitor that Janine was talking about is something that the landfill will install. They will manage the equipment, but we would have access to that data, or maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that. I think it lays it out a little bit more in the plan.
Yeah, so they do have a perimeter monitoring plan that they kind of explain what they're gonna be doing, but they are going to be submitting that data to us. And they will be, sending that to us on a quarterly basis, but we can also review the data when we do our
Yeah,
inspection.
whenever
or
we need
If
to.
we would like to see the
Would
data.
a third party or a neutral party be better? I mean, because you're monitoring yourself, so if you got to shut the facility down for a day and you lose X amount of dollars, it's in your best interest to maybe look the other way. Where a neutral party or a third party comes in and says, hey, man, that's unacceptable, we got to shut you down. I mean,
I'm not sure about that because it is a landfill, and to be honest with you, I don't know with these fugitive emissions, you can't really shut it down.
I was just
But, you know,
generalizing,
Yeah,
like, you
yeah.
got to do whatever you got to do to stop
Right.
whatever's.
Yeah.
I can add, just talking to the landfill while they've been developing this plan, like ultimately, yes, the landfill will have the equipment, but like all the data is gonna be managed by like an outside third-party consulting firm. So it's not like the landfill is gonna be like opening an Excel spreadsheet and managing the data themselves. It's like,
Okay.
they did hire someone to do that.
Is that a privately owned landfill?
So,
No.
this is the county, St. Clair County owns Smiths Creek landfill.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we were using the terminology earlier of they, we were referring to the county.
Yeah.
Because it's a county-owned landfill. So all the negotiations that we had were with the Smiths Creek landfill county employees, and then also the county attorney, and then they had their consulting firm that was hired by the county.
Is that helpful?
Yes.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, just one last quick,
Sure.
one with this young lady over here with,
Sandy?
Sandy, some of the things she had said about who's to blame, what's to blame. I mean, like, That absolutely would be helpful, because if there's an elected person in this position, I'm not gonna vote for that person ever again. If there's a proposal that needs to be voted in or down, I think the community should know about it. I mean, just, because like, you can just sit back and look the other way and do nothing, but if we can elect, like with Robert Felix, I think he's the good person for this job. And he fingered a person, Jeff Bohm. If that's true or not, I don't know, but
Yeah.
if that's the case, I would never vote for Jeff Bohm for anything, or any other person in that situation. So if there's a person that dropped the ball on this, or a failed policy, just a simple decision, I mean, that the community should know that, so we know, I guess in a sense, yeah, to know who to blame or what to blame that on.
Yeah, I hear
So
what
we
you're
can,
saying.
we can be proactive about who we're voting for, whatever we're doing, that, proposals or whatever, so.
Yeah, I
That's
hear what
all.
you're saying.
Yes.
It's not something we can really speak to, but
Yeah.
we do understand.
No, it's not
What
like
you're
we're
saying,
trying to
for
get a
sure.
lynch mob, but like, if it's an entity that caused this, I think it's helpful to know.
Yep.
So we can, not
And
vote.
we're here, so we're definitely want to move this forward too. So it's like, I know that stuff, everything that's happened. I think this is the best case scenario when things like this happen, is that we have these enforcement actions. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox when a company is not under escalated enforcement, but this is another bigger, better tool that we can use to ensure compliance. So it's a good result right now where we are. Hopefully we can kind of move things forward, but as far as like what you're talking about, we can't really, there's not one thing to point to, I don't think
Sure,
either.
and I can see it on a personal level, day-to-day at work. We were just audited with ISO, and they're doing an environmental end of it. So
Okay.
every chemical in our building has to be spoken for, right down to the last letter.
Yep.
It's kind of crazy how it is. But they're there a week, they're gone, and then the company just looks the other way on everything. The week before they come, they go around the building, make sure everything's picked up, make sure nobody's vehicles are leaking. Well, it's almost silly how the company just, for the rest of the year, they just ignore all the environmentals. It's like day in and day out. I'm not gonna tell you where I work, so.
Yeah, no. Probably a good
I was just
idea.
gonna
These
say,
people know though, maybe.
That's
but
the
Janine,
purpose of the
yeah.
compliance
Yeah.
plan. So we
Yep.
don't just take enforcement and say, okay, pay us a
Yep.
penalty, we'll see you later.
done. Yeah.
So you have to be under this contract for at least 4 years, where you're doing these additional plans, you're submitting these reports. We wanna look at the data to back up what you're doing, we wanna evaluate, come out, do inspections. So there's a lot more that this landfill is going to be required to do because of this enforcement
Yep.
action.
And then from the materials management, perspective, just to let you know, myself and Carolyn, we're out inspecting the facility every single quarter. And on top of that, I've conducted, just unannounced, I
Yep.
show up, I do off-site odor surveys, I'll go on site, even if it's not the formal quarterly inspection, we've been there pretty regularly, and we'll continue to be. That's not gonna stop after the 4
Yeah.
years, that's gonna continue on.
And I'm not gonna fault anybody on this panel at all. I'm guessing you're all from out of town. I mean, it's like, to me, we have issues within the township. I've come to Rob with issues in the township, and it's generally the people that, they don't even live here, they don't pay our taxes, but they come in and create problems, and then they just walk away, because, I don't live there anyway. You understand kind
Yeah.
of what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know who works at the landfill, if that's the scenario there too, people just don't care, or if it's that type of a situation, but, I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
So-
Thank you.
No, thank you for your questions, and I know Aaron mentioned the unannounced inspections, and for air quality, we do the same thing. We don't call and say, hey, we're gonna be there. We just show up and we're like, hey, we're here to inspect, be ready, so. Other questions? Oh, yes.
I know real quick.
Oh, no, you're totally fine.
Aaron, thank you for touching on the inspections. I'm Liz Masters from Wales Township. And I was sitting in the audience thinking the same thought, that OSHA, even on a job site or what have you, or a workplace, can show up at any time unannounced, that entity. So you did answer my question there. So I just have another quick question, the CTI, and possibly you can answer this question. Maybe you can. We're all here to learn. Are are you familiar with if CTI runs other landfills? And if there's been any violations that you're aware of in the last 5 to 10 years, is my question.
I mean, CTI definitely is a engineering consultant for other landfills in the state, and maybe out of state too, I don't know, but in our district, they do a fair amount of work in the landfill engineering and design in southeast Michigan. So I can't really say off the top of my head. I mean, there are other landfills with violations. I just don't know off the top of my head if CTI worked on,
Right.
you know, the projects at those sites.
Okay, I understand. And I understand why it's hard for you to answer that. I appreciate it.
I can just add that if it matters to you, so our district, our Warren District Office, at least for air quality, we oversee Oakland County, Macomb County, St. Clair County, and the MMD division also oversees Wayne County. So but for our district in Warren, overseeing Oakland, Macomb, and St. Clair, we have 4 landfills active in our county, and CTI only has work in Smiths Creek. So the other 3 in that tri-county area, CTI is not involved, if that helps you any.
Okay,
So-
all right, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. You guys are being so good with, with the walking up. I appreciate it.
All right, pardon me, my voice cracks. I lost my voice, so it's been gone for 2 weeks. But my name is Kim Parsons Williams. I live about 1.5 miles from the landfill. I've left lots of messages for you. So I just first want to start by saying thank you for getting involved. Who knows how long we would have continued to be poisoned if you didn't get involved. So I appreciate your work. And I also appreciate the low fine that you issued the county, because ultimately we're going to be paying that fine. So I appreciate that low fine, and I would like to encourage you to encourage the county to do something like the SEP, where they give back to the community, take some of that money and invest it back into the people that were affected by that. I also want to say something about the monitoring, the perimeter monitoring system. I don't have trust in CTI or the landfill to monitor those. If CTI was doing their job, we would have never gotten to this situation that we're at in the first place. So I don't know if you can slide something else in there where a neutral party can monitor those monitors, so that way we know what's going on. And then I know that we're under the research and development project for the septic bioreactor, and I think that permit is going to be ending or coming up to expire the end of this year. And I would just ask that you please reconsider extending that permit. We're the only landfill that allows raw septic to be put into the landfill, and at this point, we're the guinea pigs, we're the test dummies, and I don't know, what that's going to lead to. So possibly we could get that permit pulled, maybe use something else, I don't know, but I just think that we're playing with fire with that. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Oh, now you can come
Now
up,
I can
Rob.
sneak up, all right. First of all, I just want to say thank you I know this, for those of you that didn't know this is not a required meeting. The required meeting is next week, and it's being done virtually, so I appreciate that you all came out today to hear people. I think it leads to a much better conversation than the other one. It can answer a lot of different questions that people have. So I did have some things that I kind of wanted to talk about that aren't necessarily directly related to the consent order, but there was a lot of, I've read through not only all the violation notices, but all the responses, and the kind of the back and forth that went on was at some points kind of honestly pretty childish and irritating. I thought the responses were, just arguing over who smelled what, which is really not even relevant because people obviously are smelling it. So why argue over it? But there were things in the violations and then again in the responses that didn't kind of match up. So, and by the way, I think, as a township, we have a love-hate relationship with EGLE, right? I mean, a lot of times we think they're overly invasive. In this case, I think we need you, so I appreciate all the work you do. So be as invasive as you need to be. So there were some things like I lost my spot there. testing on, certain testing that's performed on a newer cell of a landfill. You guys had cited some things, and the landfill came back and said, hey, we don't even have to test for that until the cell is 5 years old. And I'm wondering, like, on things like that, are we looking at legislation? Are we looking at administrative things that could change that would prevent that in the future? Because the reality is that that landfill still has room for another cell. I don't want a repeat of that. So, when you look at things like that, are you guys looking at additional means to find protection for people in a situation like that?
Let me answer that one. That specific issue is related to that surface emission monitoring that they have to do over the waste to check for the gas emissions. And under the federal air regulations, they're not subject to that requirement until waste has been in place a certain number of years. That is a problem that we've seen at other landfills where the waste starts generating gas sooner, and waiting 5 years is totally inadequate. So the solid waste law was actually amended back in 2023, and the changes are taking effect over these last couple of years. But that was one of the things that EGLE requested. Like, we're going through all these updates to our solid waste law that applies to landfills. What can we do to improve the landfill gas, monitoring and collection requirements? So that is something that was addressed. The legislators passed, and so now a municipal solid waste landfill such as Smiths Creek landfill has to start monitoring for gas emissions from their newer cells much sooner, as soon as 6 months after.
That's good. That's good to hear. All right. Another one was on gas collection systems. EGLE had said that the design of the gas collection system itself was insufficient. Yet you guys review those, right? So what is your role in reviewing that, and how could it have been, are we looking at how we could have caught that sooner, or did the landfill generate more gas than we anticipated, or kind of what was the situation there, and how can we, moving forward, how can we avoid that?
Yeah, do you want to talk to that, Greg?
Yeah, you're right. That is part of, like, when EGLE, issues a permit to construct a landfill, part of that is the design of the gas collection system. So that was a little bit of a, back and forth between us and the landfill on that issue. We cited what the regulation says, but ultimately our position was that the effective capacity of the system was diminished. So when it was first installed, the design plans showed that there was enough capacity to withdraw the anticipated amount of gas. That was revisited when the bioreactor project permit was reviewed. But what we believe is that system lost capacity to remove gas over time. So certain components failed or needed maintenance, and so we felt that they weren't meeting the original design anymore.
Gotcha. Okay.
Is basically what we were trying to point out there.
So on the last violation notice.
Let me say.
Yep, go ahead.
What happened was the system was designed, but as the time went by, because of the accumulation of water or ice or something, it increased the pressure drop in the system, so much so that there was not enough vacuum was available in the.
So it wasn't working as it was designed.
Yes.
Yeah. Because of maintenance.
Yeah.
I got it. All right. My last one on that particular subject is Domtar. So when I first and I've had multiple conversations with Matt Williams about, what's going on, it seemed to, from the very beginning, he seemed to point to cell 8. And in the response on the last violation notice, there was quite a bit of stuff in there about Domtar and some of the stuff that had been brought in that seemed to be creating, or at least from the response was creating an issue. And that stuff that Domtar was bringing in has to go through a bunch of, from my understanding, had to go through a bunch of approvals before it could be dumped there. So I kind of wanted to get some feedback on that. What was going on, and I mean, should it have been dumped there? Should it have been dumped somewhere else? Did they put something in there that shouldn't have been there?
Yeah, I don't think we could say that they shouldn't have put it in there, but the landfill and their consultants thought that that waste that was taken from Domtar, that sludge waste,
Yeah.
may have been contributing to the higher sulfur content, and that was a thing that was happening in cell 8, that portion of the landfill. There was definitely more sulfur compounds in the gas, which made it smell stronger than the rest of the landfill. So the landfill, you know, they had to go around and take samples of the gas from all the different areas, and that was several times higher in that cell. So we asked the question, what wastes maybe have you put in this cell that weren't in other cells that could
Right.
contribute to this high sulfur? And that was their best guess, I would say,
Okay.
in their response, but there was no sulfur, no total sulfur testing that on that waste material that could be provided to verify that it was high in sulfur. It was just their indication based on the process at the plant that
Gotcha.
generated
Okay.
it. But sulfur itself doesn't make the waste, hazardous where it would have to go to a different landfill.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
it might not have been part of the normal testing procedure. So they have to test for certain chemicals that when they're at a certain level would make the waste hazardous. That has to go to a special hazardous waste landfill. It can't go in a solid
Gotcha.
waste
Okay.
landfill. So that was kind of their attempt to, look at possible waste that might have made that sulfur content so high.
Yeah. So on their responses, I mean, you had required in your violation notices that they give certain responses back that included timeframes for compliance. And I didn't see any point in time where they ever gave you a response that had a time frame for compliance. So that leaves me a little bit concerned. Now we've got a consent order. What's going to be the difference if they didn't respond with everything that they were supposed to respond in the violation notices? How can we be sure that they're going to respond with everything they need to respond to on a consent order?
Yeah, Janine, do you want to talk a little bit about how the consent order is enforced and the timelines in there and what would happen if they don't meet those timelines?
Well, I guess I would just say that's not uncommon in responses to violation notices.
Okay.
But, when we had that timeline slide,
Yeah.
where we were looking at that time when we issued the enforcement notice to where we are today, I mean, that's when, you sit down in an enforcement meeting and you say, hey, you're gonna be agreeing to a contract that has a compliance program, and you have to commit to fixing these problems. So it isn't uncommon for companies or, municipalities or whoever to not always say in a violation notice response what they're gonna do. But I do believe that the landfill has already taken a lot of steps to correct the violations. And then in addition to those actions, they're required to do all these things. So if they don't do them, then I think it's one thing to get a violation notice and then you're kind of like, okay, we're just talking, but now they're paying a penalty, they're gonna be under an order. Not to say that we don't have entities that violate consent orders, because we do, but the one thing that we really haven't talked about tonight so far is that we have seen a significant reduction in complaints. So I think that there have been improvements out there. Now, again, like we said, landfills are dynamic.
Right.
And it really does depend on your team. So, if the county is committed to, fixing the problem, which I think they have invested quite a bit in making upgrades, making sure they're doing their maintenance, that's all gonna be really critical. And if they're not, then we're gonna be back out there
Yeah.
citing violations. So, There
Well,
are.
we have definitely seen a reduction in complaints coming to
Yeah.
our office, which is
Yeah.
good. I mean, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
I think what we want, though, is just the protection moving forward, that it doesn't reoccur.
Right.
I mean, it seemed to be kind of cyclical based on time of year as well, when it was more intense. So, I mean,
Yeah.
as we got towards the later end of summer, it would get more intense. So I think there's still some apprehension from a lot of us that, it could reoccur. But I will say for sure that the amount of complaints that we have received in our office has been greatly reduced.
Yeah, I think that supplemental flare
But
should
another,
help too. Like, there have been, some of those big infrastructure changes that happen.
Right.
But I totally understand, like, they're gonna have to be committed to ensuring that all the things that they're doing out there, that they're maintaining them and staying, on top of everything.
So our
Another
board-
thing I
go
want to
ahead.
say, as long as they are under this consent order, that is at least 4 years, there is a stipulated penalty provisions in the consent order. So we can demand a stipulated penalty for failure to comply.
Okay. So our board has adopted a resolution in support of the consent order. I'll make sure we forward it to you if we haven't already. The only thing that we were looking for is, we absolutely would prefer, I mean, the reality is the people here in the audience have suffered once already, right? I mean, with the smells and the health concerns and everything else. I realize that the penalty, to me, it seems, honestly, what I thought the penalty would be, it's a lot smaller than I had anticipated that it would be, so I'm thankful for that. But at the same time, they're all taxpayers, and so they're gonna have to pay or foot the bill for that fine. So we absolutely would support a SEP. Our board is supporting that. I've talked to the board chair, Commissioner Samasco, a few times about that. He's kind of asked what we would like to see that be. So if you have ideas, I thought, the one that I saw in there that I really liked that I had never considered was, they're doing the air monitoring outside. And, one of the things that you showed on your slide was that, they publish that data on a website. And I've seen that with other landfills. So, maybe that's what it is. But if you guys have ideas or thoughts on what you would like that SEP to be, we certainly can share that with Commissioner Samasco. I think they're open to that idea. Which I think would be good. And I realize maybe that's not the entire part of the fee, but at least we've got something coming back to the people that have already suffered from that. And I also want to say that, I like some of the steps that the County Board of Commissioners have taken. When this first started, we adopted a resolution that we gave to the county that had some specific things that we wanted to see. Air monitoring was one of those. We wanted to see air monitoring. We wanted to see, and they just voted to approve an outside company to evaluate what's going on at the landfill. So they'll be putting out an RFP for that. We kind of want to know, and we want to know who's, ultimately who's responsible for that, right? I mean, where did we go wrong? Where did the maintenance go wrong? That caused that. And having an outside party evaluate that, I think, is a pretty critical step. And I'm glad that the County Board of Commissioners have done that. Mr. Felix, thank you for all your advocacy on behalf of the residents. Absolutely appreciate that. I do want to say that County Board of Commissioners aren't here tonight because they've already heard from residents at their meeting, I think 3 weeks ago, when they talked about the consent agenda. So they didn't feel it would be appropriate to be here at this meeting when we're here asking questions of EGLE. So, but again, thank you for your continued oversight, and hopefully this problem goes away and never comes back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep our fingers crossed on that one. Did you have a question too? All right, awesome.
Hi, my name's Al Williams, husband of Kim, excuse me.
Husband of Kim, is that your real
Yeah.
name?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. I understand.
I keep hearing that there's no smell, or the smell has gone down, which is true, but that is due to the fact that they're not pumping any more septage as of right now into this into that bioreactor, because it's off. So of course it's going to smell better. Not taken away from their what the work they've done, but when you're not pumping raw sewage, there's obviously not going to be that smell. And just like my wife pointed out, this permit that's coming up, if you just stop the raw sewage getting pumped in here, I've even read you can use Coca-Cola to help disintegrate whatever, or speed up the process. You can use whatever, water. Does it really have to be raw septic? I don't think it does. And if that just got denied, I think we'd all be happy, because that smell, because from what I've been through all the county meetings, me and my wife go to all of them, pretty much what I've learned is like this bioreactor with raw septic produces 7 times more gas than a normal landfill does because of this. And that's what overloaded this cell 8. Even though that's not a part of the bioreactor, it all stems through the ground and all that gas has to go somewhere, and that's what failed. CTI, the man who runs the dump used to be an employee of CTI. Don't really trust him. I've asked him at a meeting. I'm a truck driver. Okay, I have a hazmat endorsement. I can drive whatever. I have to go through testing. I have to go through training every 3 years. I even got to go get physicals just to make sure I'm safe on the road to protect people's families. This man is in charge of a bioreactor. And I asked him, do you do daily inspections? He shrugged, so yeah, okay, well, if you did, how did we get to this point? Because I'm no engineer, but pipes have gaskets, there's valves, there's scales, whatever. If you're doing a daily inspection, you would see the rise in gas from the septic going into the pipe. You would see signs. Why wasn't this noticed? Why are we where we are now? It just don't make sense to me. And I don't know. There has to be more inspections, more on site. This falls on a lot of people. I mean, our community got failed, and it's a shame. It's a shame we're all here. Thank you guys for coming.
Although we're enjoying the conversation, I would
right.
have to say that.
But I just think there's more.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's got to be somebody held accountable, and this guy's still working there. I don't get it. I know if I costed my work millions of dollars to fix an issue, and I'm overseeing it, I don't think I'd have a job. So.
And we can't, that's not something that we can do.
No, absolutely. I get it. But maybe more inspections. I don't know.
Is there anything that you wanted to add at all, Greg or Carolyn, about the bioreactor and inspections and going forward even that might be helpful?
Well, I'd like to point out that the bioreactor has been running for 15 years in various cells, and there never was any odor problems. I mean,
right.
Through the entirety. Recently, we did start having problems because the system had got old and was breaking down. You had pipes that were settling, and you had leachate pooling into them so that gas could not be extracted from those pipes. So you can't really expect to notice that problem.
Why can't you? There's no gauges or anything to tell you that the pressure of gas is getting higher, or there's more being produced, or something's failing, a warning light. There's nothing to let you know this is failing until the community smells it?
No, that would be something that if their gas collection system is malfunctioning, that would be something that you'd have to go through records, and also it may be relative to their gas plant. I mean, it could be several things. You have problems out in the landfill itself. It could be relative to the gas plant, which would then involve air quality division. I mean, there's a lot of reasons where it would fail, and it's just not that easy to identify them.
I think one thing I want to add there is I do think there needs to be more points on their vacuum system to check pressure, and that's one of the things that we included in this consent order, is that instead of just looking at flow and pressure at the blower that provides the vacuum, that's either by the flare or by their energy plant. They do have pressures there, temperatures and flows, but this whole pipe network that provides that vacuum to all the gas collectors in the landfill, that's something that they needed to have more more access to see, like, where are we losing vacuum? Because that was a huge part of this problem, so
So you
I
might
agree
not
with
be an
you.
engineer, but you are on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, I agree
Well,
with what you're
I
saying.
mean,
is
it's
that-
just, you're trying to put two and two
No,
together,
yes.
like, where's the problem, you know?
Right,
And it's
so-
like, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, something's gotta end somewhere. I
Right.
mean,
So they were able to go out and take pressures at various locations, but, in some cases, they might have to install a port to, put a pressure gauge on or something. So I think part of what we're gonna be looking at going forward is, well, you need to have the accessibility to take these vacuum pressures all across your landfill and do it on a regular basis and report it to EGLE. So, I mean, I'm hoping that that's gonna be a big part of, like, the proactive, like, finding the problem before the neighbors have to smell it.
Yeah.
But I guess that's, I just wanna let you know that that is part of the order, this vacuum,
Okay.
regular checks of that, and you're absolutely right, though, that, there needs to be a way to find this out before the stuff starts.
because
getting on site.
if this was a popular thing, I don't think we'd be the only one in the country to do it, and a lot of, like, just the sound of raw septic just being poured on it, it's not a selling point,
So
it's-
I think what I can maybe add to that is that, so with this consent order, we are requiring them to do wellhead monitoring twice a month. So the regulations require only wellhead monitoring to be done monthly. And one of the things they have to monitor on the parameters is pressure. So MMD staff can best describe what wells are in the bioreactor area. But as far as a well field in its entirety, there's well heads, and they have to go up to each wellhead every month and monitor certain parameters. And there's a lot of factors that can tell them if there's a failure in the system, like how the methane concentration is, what is the pressure. So with this consent order, we're now requiring them to do not once, but now twice. And we're requiring them to do at least 12 to 14 days apart. So that way, if they come on, say, October 31st, they can't come back, November 1st to do their second one. They got to space them out. So during each month, when they're doing these two readings, that will give them an indication. And then, then they submit that data to us, at least at a minimum. They're always supposed to have it available, but they have to always submit it to us twice a year. And a lot of times when we see that stuff, if they're not meeting the regulations or we're getting complaints, we can then act on that. So to answer like your question, that would be the indicator. So when the landfill's doing these monitor readings monthly, they would have known, to be honest with you, they would have known. And now we're requiring them to do twice.
And that's
So now
nice.
they'll know even more now, more frequently.
Right.
So, and you can let us know what the
There are
complaints.
a lot more
Right.
requirements in this enforcement action now because of what happened. And a lot of it's like a lot of technical information, but I think that when, when the emissions were so high there, that 45,000 you said?
Yep.
Of the methane and then the H2S concentrations, those are really concerning to us. And this enforcement action, we worked really hard to, in negotiations with the county, to have all these additional requirements so that we can very closely monitor them out there.
Has it even been a conversation with, like, whoever you guys make your decisions, or is it all grouped together? Has it ever been discussed about stopping the septage?
I mean, we talked about it, as part of this enforcement action. Our first, when the complaints started to increase in September, after we issued our first violation notice for the off-site odors, we sent an email to the landfill manager, saying, you need to suspend septage injection. Not because we necessarily knew that was causing the odors, but we certainly we knew that there was a problem with odors.
Didn't want to add to it.
Getting off, right, so you don't want to make gas faster when you already have a problem collecting it all.
Right.
And they agreed and actually, informed us that they had suspended it, back in September.
Yep. And that's why I think the smell is, like, yeah, they did all that work, yeah, I get it, and hopefully it's working good, but
Yeah,
we're just, as a community, we're just tired of being guinea pigs, you know what I mean? I mean, this was all just a guinea pig thing for us. It's affecting it affected our lives, like, drastically. I just moved to this township in December of 2020, and it didn't smell like that, and I spent all this money on property and a house, and I got an in-ground pool, and I can't even go out there, and we even donate our pool to special needs kids once a day every summer, every week in the summer. And we had to cancel, all the swimming classes for these kids because you can't go out there. Like, and now right now it's okay, but that's that raw sewage. I just hope you guys just discuss it more and weigh out a different option. Because I read that there's other things that can be used. Why not? It's.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to why the county, chose septage. I mean, my recollection was back when.
I got an opinion, but yeah, you probably don't want that. But.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't really speak to that.
Looks
but
like looks like an S with 2 lines going through it.
So I'm just going to add one other thing too, is that this is not just like a state type level. The federal regulations reference bioreactors. So it's, a lot of the guidance we get, we go off of some of the federal guidance. So it's really a nationwide issue, whereas it kind of has to, we need some help with that too.
We got to this point,
Right.
just because of my hazmat license on what I got to go through. Right. To get to this point where we were, I can't believe it got to this point. And it didn't get spotted, until the community came together, But I thank you guys for coming and listening, and I
Thanks
just hope
for
there's a
sharing
further
about
discussion on the septage.
I mean, we're going to consider all the comments.
That's all I want to hear.
So we'll talk about that because to Greg's point, you guys are bringing up a lot of good points. Now we'll talk about, once we get done with the question and answer, how those can be converted into actual official comments for the record. So, yeah, I really appreciate you
Thank
guys
you so
sharing
much.
what's going on too. Thank you. So is your official name Bob's wife, or do you have something else?
Preferably not.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Kathy, and yes, I am Bob's wife. And I did use the pad that I got from you
You can take
guys,
that
so
home
that
with
was
you, too.
great. So a couple things that I have questions on is, I've heard and I know that the odors have been contained, and the goal of the enforcement action is to have the cause of these odors repaired. Will these repairs also support excess gas production from addition to the garbage? Let's say it is a liquid addition. Let's say it is the septage addition. Will what's being enforced today support 7 times a gas production? And I thinking this is kind of an unknown, but that's really important because that's what started everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that generally the answer is yes. It's what we're looking for improvements to the vacuum system that pulls the gas out is going to have to meet whatever permit requirements we have for the landfill. So that includes, right now, still this, bioreactor permit.
Correct.
So that was looked at, in the original design of the bioreactor, how much gas do we expect to be generated because of this project, and sizing, the pipes as they grow the landfill and add more cells and more waste and more liquids. So we are going to be looking to make sure that they, as part of this, that they can return to that original design requirement. So the amount, say it's, we measure vacuum in inches of water column. So if the original design said, we anticipate this much gas, and in order to get that, we have to have a minimum of 30 inches of water column, then that's the kind of information we're going to be looking for with some of these repairs and upgrades, is to make sure that they're bringing back the broken parts of the system, at least to the original design. And part of that was to anticipate, how much gas are we likely to produce. But you're right, it is a bit of an unknown because you're using a model, right? You're plugging numbers in to an engineering model to estimate gas production, And so we also are gonna need to look at what have we actually seen? Like, what is the actual flow of gas, to make sure
Right,
that
because right
is the
now,
model
you know,
even close, right?
today's flow of gas is probably very different than the future flow of gas. And then these tubes are getting repaired, and they're getting fixed, and they are on there, they will always be sitting on garbage, so they will always be moving. They will always be filling with water. They will always crink and crank and all that kind of stuff. What I think I'm hearing from what you said to Al is that with increased monitors near those parts, that has the potential of catching those versus odors going into the community.
Yes, correct. So if that's the concept, that's one of the concepts, is that if they're checking the vacuum on all these pipes that provide vacuum to all the collectors in the waste, at more locations and more frequently, that they should be able to start to see when our vacuum's dropping in this stretch, right? So instead of waiting until, oh, well, we didn't know, and the pipe is full of water now because it's settled as the waste settled, they start to get an early indicator that we're losing vacuum. They can isolate it, hopefully to a certain length of pipe, and then do the fixes sooner rather than waiting until it's totally obstructed.
Now, is part of this, okay, it's noticed, yeah, it's filled, there's water, there's something not working. Is there a timeline that this needs to be addressed before, do you have, you got 2 weeks to fix it, you have a month to fix it? Or it's, you should look into this and take care of this?
Well, I think the way it's framed in the order right now is that they would have to identify the area that needs repair and report to us, a plan for how long it's gonna take and what they have to do. So it's something at least that we can review. It probably depends on the length of pipe.
Correct, yeah. There's a lot of unknowns.
One thing we've talked about with the county, with the landfill operator, is that at some point, it may be beneficial to take the main vacuum pipes outside of the landfill so they're not as subject to settlement. And that often happens at landfills. They do that after they've kind of developed the whole footprint of the landfill, and they don't want to necessarily deal with.
Yeah, again and again and again. Yeah.
So, and I think that that's something that they're considering as they move on with operations. Is
All
like,
right.
when does it make sense to consider maybe moving some of this infrastructure outside of the fill so it's not so subject to the
All
waste
right.
settling?
And then one question and then one comment. Can the enforcement timeline be extended in the future? So let's say there's a fail in 2 years. Does a whole enforcement have to go all over again, or it just gets addressed? Because as a citizen, I would be more interested in the maximum timeline that would have to be under enforcement for that. But halfway through, you don't say, oh, there's been a fail, we need to add on more time. This is a contract for this amount of time.
Not necessarily. It's kind of hard to answer that. It's not that black and white, really.
Okay.
So it kind of depends on the violation. So if there is a fail of some sort, we would look at like how quickly they were able to correct it. Again, because it's 4 years, they can't seek a termination of the consent order until after 4 years. So if that violation that was issued, if it was corrected and we've been able to evaluate and determine that, they're back in compliance and we have pretty good surety that they're gonna remain in compliance, then that wouldn't probably prevent us from, and at that 4-year mark, determining whether we can terminate or not. But it's really hard to predict because sometimes after you negotiate a consent order, there are things that come up that are outside the scope of the order. In this case, this is a pretty detailed, thorough order, so I don't anticipate that. But at any point, we can take another enforcement action.
I see.
So, but that being said, we'd look to what's already in here and that whether we'd carry it forward. But I think based on how much detail is here, it probably would be dependent on the violation. If there was like a big fail closer to year 4, it kind of depends on the timing and what the violations are.
Yeah, it's an unfair question.
But honestly, I also I know sometimes people like to have longer enforcement orders, but I also feel like if there are future violations and they're significant, and we've already been in enforcement with somebody, we're just gonna start another enforcement action.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't mean that we can't do this again, you
Right.
know? We would want to, just like anything else, make sure that they're correcting the violations, get them under a very robust compliance program. So, you know, we have a lot of different enforcement tools.
Great. And then the comment I have, I
Also-
heard, oh, I'm sorry.
After 4 years, we require them to demonstrate they complied with the.
So they apply to you and say,
Yes.
we
And
have
it is-
done
it is a
everything in our
termination
power.
By mutual consent, they request and we approve that, the request.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
So if we find that they are substantially not in compliance with the consent order, we just wouldn't terminate the consent order.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
The comment I have is earlier you were saying that you can reference current plans that you have as far as monitoring and everything that's going to be preventative in the landfill, that you can have that. Let me start again. So I just would encourage EGLE to reference the current plans that they have in place now, protecting the community, for any new permit that is granted or any permit that is continued. Because these are interpreted as costly to maintain and costly to do. So a choice on the air of money will be, we don't want that anymore. Not that we don't need that anymore, but we don't want to do that anymore. So it's just a comment that I have, that if these monitoring systems can stay in place for things in the future, that would be outstanding. So, and thank you for your time, and thank you for being here. I appreciate
the
that.
comments and questions, for sure.
Thanks.
Young gentleman in the back coming up for his questions.
I know it's past 8 o'clock, but I'm gonna make it
No,
fast.
you're totally fine. We
I'll
said,
put a
we
little-
have time. We're good.
Probably a little different twist on the whole thing.
Okay.
I've been a resident of Kimball Township of over 80 years. I saw the blue clay come out of the ground to where that landfill is, tons and tons and tons of train cars and hauled out of there. My situation is, I guess anyway, my name is George Jackson. I was a farm boy and was in chemical engineering. I got my job at Coca-Cola making product.
Secret recipe that you're not going
That
to
I
share,
can't have.
right?
That's,
Okay.
that's in the
Just
big
making
tower
sure.
in Atlanta, locked up.
I've seen it. I've been there. I've seen it.
Anyway, question is, we're looking at how much hydrogen sulfide's in there and methane. Are there any other gases that we're being able to record out of their levels?
Yeah, I'll answer a little bit, and Robert can add maybe, but, so the landfill gas, most of what's produced when the waste breaks down is methane and carbon dioxide, so that makes up, you know, close to 98, 99% of the gas. Sometimes some air gets in there, so that's something that can be monitored for, oxygen, nitrogen. Hydrogen sulfide is one that, you know, that we know is in there and is odorous, so it's not always, you know, it's not always checked at every well, but they can sample the gas for it before it goes to the flare or the plant, because there's emission standards there. But, I mean, those are I guess, the main components of the gas, but I think there's opportunity to, you know, to sample for additional gases that are in there. So I don't know if, Robert, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so they have to, with their flare, they have to do sampling of the hydrogen sulfide gas. Hydrogen sulfide is the main constituent within the gas, but then I think also monthly within this consent order, they're also going to have to take that sample and send it to the lab. And when you send it to the lab, that encompasses all the sulfur compounds, so not just hydrogen sulfide. So that kind of gives us another indication of what the concentration really is when you're encompassing all the compounds. So they'll have to continue to do that. So.
The only reason I asked that question is I live 2.5 miles northwest of the landfill. Haven't had a real issue with any odors or anything there. But I've noticed this year, primarily, maybe it was because the odors were in the air, that I burn firewood, okay? Well, the smell of that smoke is different now, what I've been burning. So did that wood absorb the gases and make the smell of smoke different? Or is the equipment they're using there, is there some, or the oil companies or gas companies, are they adding in something to gas that's making things, exhaust even smells different today? Might be my nose, but that's just one question on that end. To make it quick and short, on the other side.
As long as you're not burning treated wood. There's no burning of treated wood.
No, not treated wood,
Okay.
no. Anyway, being a farm boy for 19 years, around that area there was 9 farmers in that area. Probably 500 head of cattle, maybe 600 head of cattle. Now I maybe got 10 in that whole area. Methane had to be stronger back then than it is now at the landfill. So that's my deal there. You know, we had, my grandfather and my dad, we had horses, we had cattle, we had hogs, we had sheep, and we had chickens. So any of you that haven't been here back in those days don't realize what that smells like. So it's something you had to put up with in those days. So it's just, if they took and measured now, if that were still there and they took and went by this farm and measured it, oh, you'd have more than what you want to have there. And the big dairy farms, the beef farms up in the, farther up in the thumb there, I go by those. Yes, you get downwind, you got an issue. But I just, you know, this, yes, we want the landfill cleaned up and run properly. Will it be possible without having to shut it down? I mean, when I go by there every night, I don't smell a whole lot anymore. But I see that big mountain there, you know, and the flames going up on top of it. Every day I go by there. But I guess that's my main concern, that yesterday was yesterday. Those few of those scents were there then, and now they're there, but it's a landfill that's causing them. So which way are we going? That's the main thing. So that's all I've got. So good, thanks for coming up, doing a good job. We do have to get it squared away before somebody has a problem health-wise or anything like that, because there's all that kind of, I've even got problems in my own family that did this cause it, you know. So that's one thing you have to look at. And I know Mr. Crow there, that situation, they have issues, had issues too, so. But a lot of health situations in this area, whether they're related to landfill, we do not know.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I realize it's getting late, and I appreciate all of your patience. A couple of comments and then a couple of questions that the public sent to me that weren't able to be here. First, I just wanted to comment, Supervisor Usikowski stated that, you know, a speculation why the other commissioners weren't here. I'll offer speculation because I invited them all personally and announced it at the board meeting. I think they didn't want to come out and face the public that they polluted. So that's my speculation. I am here, and I'm determined that we're not going to get further pollution. I also wanted to let the board, or the EGLE, know that I voted against the consent order when it was brought to the Board of Commissioners a few weeks ago. I was the only commissioner up there to do that because I didn't feel it went far enough to protect the public that I serve. risk is part of having a landfill. We all know that. We host a landfill, but I think we need to minimize the risk. The only reason not to do so is to make more money, more profit. I find that unacceptable on the backs of the people in my district. Two things that have come to light, and this is one of the questions from the public and also my reservation with voting for that consent order. The consent order didn't address or talk about the septic bioreactor. And I've had many good conversations with Greg and with Arani, Carolyn. I appreciate those and I understand, but to me it comes down to a simple factor. If I spill 5 gallons of liquid on the floor, I can clean that up pretty easy. I can contain that pretty easy. If I spill 55 gallons of liquid on the floor, my containment problem becomes much difficult. And that's what I'm concerned with. I was told by Dr. Se-Young, the Vice President of CTI, on January 28th of 2024, that the bioreactor that they add septage to, which is the current bioreactor, produces 7 times the amount of gas than a dry tomb landfill. 7 times the amount of gas. Now, however you talk about that and however efficient you are collecting that, when you actually have an issue, you have much, much more gas to deal with. You're dealing with that 55-gallon drum of liquid poisons being tossed into our community. So I'm asking this board, I'm asking EGLE to consider how the septic bioreactor can be removed. And I will not vote for a consent agreement that does not contain that measure. If it cannot be done, I'm going to keep asking why. I'm working with the state representatives. This bill was passed in 2011, I believe, by Phil Pavlov to authorize septic additions to a landfill. We're the only state in the nation that allows that, and our landfill is the only landfill that accepts such septic waste additions to the garbage. There's a reason for that. I'm an engineer. I'm all for new technology, but not on the backs of taking risk with the people in our area. So specific questions. I have 2 that weren't answered so far. The one I just spoke of was revoking the RDDP and permanently banning septic additions to the landfill ever on the table during this consent order? Why or why not?
Greg, do you want to talk to
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about, what our options are related to addressing the gas control issues. Like I mentioned before, we did feel that it was prudent to, talk to the county about suspending the septic injection for sure. I mean, you can't be doing that when there's a vacuum problem. As we kind of worked through the investigation and did our inspections, we were looking at, what do we think we can prove the sources of, this gas odors that are problematic off-site in the community. And, I guess our focus ended up being on, a lot of it was surrounding this area we're calling, cell 8, this newest cell in the southern part of the landfill. It is part of a bioreactor permit. It has, some of the infrastructure in place, but the county reported that they had not yet started any septic injection. So we were kind of thinking, it was a little bit counterintuitive. Like we didn't necessarily think that was going to be the case.
But they did put 153,000 gallons of septic sludge in there, as I believe Carolyn Parker noted that in one of her inspection reports, which is an activator.
No, I agree. Any kind of like wastewater sludge like that can certainly spur gas production. We talked about that quite a bit, whether or not that could be the reason that cell 8 had so much gas that wasn't being captured, whether that impacted the hydrogen sulfide concentrations. But at the same time, we knew that septic sludge from their receiving over the years had been buried in other bioreactor cells without any known incidents. So, I mean, we didn't know that to be a trigger for like a huge spur in gas production. And I think that as we looked at the issues with the vacuum system, there was a couple things that we thought were pretty clear, that vacuum had failed in some parts of the landfill. The most significant failure was the vacuum lines feeding cell 8 because it's the furthest from the source. And that for some reason, you know, that cell has more odorous gas because of the hydrogen sulfide content. But we couldn't really find a direct link to that main odor source to the bioreactor operations. I mean, I can't sit here and say that no gas emanates through the surface of the bioreactor cells where septic injection occurred. It's just that as part of our investigations and going on site at the landfill and trying to walk the hill and go around the perimeter, it seemed that the cell 8 area was the biggest part of the problem. We also had the landfill, you know, evaluate I guess the health of the gas collectors across the whole site. We requested that, and there were some older areas where some more traditional gas wells, areas that never had, you know, septic injection or bioreactor permits, had failed, and we thought, well, that could certainly be, you know, a problem as well. But I guess the bottom line was, in order to revoke a permit, you know, that initiates a formal legal process, and it's not to say that EGLE can't do that, but in that process, EGLE has to be able to provide a factual basis, you know, for the revocation of the permit based on, you know, violations and evidence and facts, and usually that process ends up, you know, having to be decided by a judge. If we revoke a permit, you know, the company, or in this case the county, is afforded due process, and they can challenge that. And so when we do those types of actions, we want to make very sure that, you know, we can connect the dots, and we just didn't feel like we had quite enough to say, this is definitely a problem with septic injection. But I definitely hear what people are saying tonight, that it's definitely an issue of, you know, if you have if you're generating gas much faster because of this process, when there is a problem, it can become a problem faster when you lose vacuum.
Thank you, Greg. That helps a lot, and that's what I wanted to hear, because some of the actual commissioners on the board that I serve with, they are indicating that this consent vindicates the bioreactor, that the bioreactor wasn't part of this issue at all. And I'd just like to know, I guess you can't give a yes or no, but it sounds like I'm hearing that it does not vindicate the bioreactor.
I wouldn't say it's vindicated. We can't say that it has nothing to do with the issue. And I do think, you know, other residents that spoke have asked, you know, what consideration can you give when these permits come up for extension? And we're definitely going to have to take a close look at that, and we're going to definitely have to consider compliance with this order. We're definitely going to have to consider, can they justify restarting this based on, you know, have they returned to the amount of vacuum that used to be there when the gas was under control. So, I mean, there's definitely going to have to be some additional consideration as we look at these extensions.
Very good. And I know there's indications, that's all I can say at this point, because there was a closed session on February 26th with the Board of Commissioners, so I'm not allowed to discuss publicly some of the future pathways that the county may choose with the landfill, but there's indications that septage is not off the table, and that's my concern. So I do appreciate your comments. However, I want to make it known publicly, I will not sign or agree to a consent order that does include the possibility of a bioreactor. I feel that strongly against it. I've studied this bioreactor in landfill since 2014 when I retired, and I quickly learned the issues. And then as I talked to other landfills around our state, they said, we have enough problem containing the gas we have. Dr. Se-Young, from the Vice President of CTI, he told me at best their design captures 85 to 90% of the gas produced. So that tells you there's 10% at least of the gas escaping, more gas produced, more gas in the public arena. So I appreciate that. One last question. The other objection I had when I voted against the consent order acceptance by the board, the consent order stipulated to be 4 years. I would really like to see that consent order carried out for the 5 years. That would take it through the next election cycle for commissioners, which I think is going to be important in this case, and also take it out to the term of the RDDP. I know our county attorney argued against that. Obviously, more monitoring, more chances to get in trouble if you violate the rules. But I think with me at the helm, I'm going to see that we don't violate the rules the best I can. So I would appreciate if that can be taken into consideration. Those will be my public comments during the virtual meeting.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You may be the last person. We'll see.
Trying to be.
Oh, you were trying to be.
I
All
was
right,
trying to be.
awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a little newer to the conversation. My name's Tommy Longo. I purposely waited till the end because I came with some questions, but the longer I sat here, the more I came up with. So I was kind of letting everybody else get their stuff out of their way. I'm also a resident of Wales, but I purchased a piece of property in Smiths Creek with my wife hoping to build a house for our growing family. And shortly after that purchase is when a lot of this started happening. Being that we're not a current resident, it was kind of on the back burner. I've been on the outskirts kind of paying attention a little bit, and that's why we decided to come tonight. Some of the questions I got are, you said there was a lot of things that they were failing to do that caused this issue. Was that a matter of preventative maintenance, technician or operator rounds being missed, wrong equipment, just failing equipment, or failing equipment being ignored? I know it's kind of a lot. Some of this stuff we might have already gone over, and I apologize, but I also have some clarifying questions. Because I find it hard to believe that they're not monitoring this and that they don't have people that are supposed to be doing rounds taking numbers, and that there should be data on this. And I'm assuming that you said that data is sent to you guys, but when you guys show up for these issues, are you looking this data over? Is there a pattern where maybe somebody was pencil whipping it and this could have been noticed sooner, and all of a sudden, once you guys show up, the numbers change?
I'm just making sure that you're pausing. You want?
Yes,
response to
sorry,
that?
I know
No,
that was
you're
a
totally
lot.
fine. No, you're good. We gave you a lot, so
maybe we
the
could
question
start
is a lot
though
too.
with
Yeah.
what, from the inspectors, what were we looking at? Because I'm not sure, we have a lot of requirements in the order that require them to do more.
Yep.
But what they were required to do outside of the order, like when we first were looking at their data.
So probably, I guess Aaron, Arana, and Carolyn would be the best to answer those questions.
I asked
right?
those specifically because I know a lot of people want to know who could be, for lack of a better term, at fault, responsible, whatever. And if the people that are supposed to be performing these jobs weren't performing them properly, that's something that I would want to know if that was part of the reason that this may be even escalated to this point.
Well, you gave a laundry list of things. Could this possibly be A through Z? Yes. There's a lot of things that kind of played into that. And I think we mentioned them kind of piecemeal, where it came down to not having monitors in places they probably should be, not having the requirement to do as much monitoring as probably was needed. So there's a lot of things, like to Janine's point, when the inspectors go out. So Carolyn, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about just like when you go out to do an inspection, are there certain things that you're looking at? Arana, we, each inspector, because we're look at different things, waste, air, we're looking at different things when we go out, so we're not kind of looking at the same, but we need to have these records, we need to look at how you're doing this, and all those are checks and balances, which some of them did lead to violations. Them not doing certain things did lead to some of the violations. So you're kind of on the right track with that, but do you want to hear more about the process? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. We can do that really quickly. Like for each one of you guys, when we first started getting the complaints, what were the things that you were looking at?
Well, the first thing, when we started getting odor complaints, we went out there and drove around and did an odor survey, trying to smell any offensive odors. And some people said they would smell it in their backyards, in low ravine areas, but at that time, we really didn't smell a whole lot.
And we didn't have a lot of data, I don't think then, right? I guess there weren't like reports that we were receiving that was telling us, correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
It was first that we were getting complaints and then trying to figure out. So I don't think that there's like a lot of data and reporting that they're providing to us. They have a design plan for their gas collection and control system.
Right.
And we evaluate that when they first start, and they do their different cells, and they're doing their construction, and they're laying their pipes, and they're supposed to be pulling the gas out. But I think what happens with landfills is that they kind of fall down on their maintenance, and then things aren't working like they're supposed to, and the gas starts, we call it fugitive emissions, it starts seeping out of the ground, and then we start smelling things, but I don't know that there's a lot of.
So some of it was failed maintenance.
Yeah.
That answers that question
Yeah,
directly.
I mean, there's certain like scans and monitoring that they're required to do by law that we would look at when we do an inspection, like what we talked about, that surface emission monitoring. Now, that's something that they have to do under federal law, also under state law, and certainly that was something we took a look at when we started getting a lot more odor complaints, is what are you finding when you're doing these scans? And they found some spots in their scans where they exceeded the methane emission standard. So they knew they had to take some action. And I think in addition, then Air Quality Division said, they had their own equipment. So they did their own scan to say, well, we really want to hone in on, did they miss anything in the areas that they're not required to scan under the law, especially. Other things like the maintenance things, like it's hard to see you can't see a buried pipe to see that it started sagging. There's not necessarily a requirement that they check vacuum every so many feet of pipe, but it would have been something that could have been done to get a quicker idea that there was a problem. So that some of these things aren't required by law, but it doesn't mean that they can't be done proactively to find maintenance issues. Some of their older gas collector wells, not in the bioreactor areas, but the older parts of the landfill before they did that, some of them were full of water, or they were pinched off. So again, until recently, they weren't really required to check those to see if they had liquids in them that was blocking the flow of gas. Now they are under a newer state law, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't have found that out if you were looking. So
We can do underground sonar scans. There's other equipment they can use that they could probably
Yes,
find
so-
these problems. Is
right,
it not
so
part
some
of the
things are
air?
regulatory requirements that we can review, that they have to produce at our inspections, and other things are more like, do you want to implement these best management practices for maintenance? And some of those things now are going to be in this consent order, because we've seen that, hey, if you would have this information proactively ahead of time, it would be helpful. So like some of these additional scans that we're talking about under this consent order, they're not required by law, they're above and beyond, and that's what's needed to correct the problem right now.
So you guys don't get their data unless there's a complaint, is that what?
We can ask for it, in most cases, we can ask for it anytime we want. So when we do our solid waste inspections, we have a checklist, and we'll look at, they have what's called an operating record. So anything that they're required to collect for data, they're supposed to put in this record. We can look at it while we do our inspection. We can call them up and say, produce this. So we look at, a lot of what we look at normally is like their groundwater monitoring data. We look at their prohibited waste inspections. We look at the areas that they put soil cover over. They have to keep records of all that stuff. And we can also look at like their surface monitoring for methane. That would be one that we do look at regularly.
As part of the permitting though, is there a set frequency to review this?
Not to review it, I guess there's a frequency that they have to collect data for all these things. So some things are monthly, some are quarterly, some are semi-annually. We try to look at what we think are the most, important documents when we do the inspections. So a lot of times that would be gas monitoring and liquid monitoring data. And then there are certain things that are submitted, like the geologists get the groundwater reports submitted every quarter or every 6 months, whatever schedule they're on, that do have to actually be sent to EGLE. And then we have to document our reviews on all that stuff.
I think I can probably add to that. So as far as the reporting of the data, so from January 1st through June 30th, in that time period, the data that's collected in that 6-month span, they deliver that to us on September 15th of that year. So if we began receiving the complaints on September of 2023. So the data that we looked at that was made available to us when they reported it was from January to June. And then the part that encompassed where all the complaints came in was from July 1st to December 31st. That data does not get sent to us until that following March. Now, that does not mean that we can't go there to find out what's going on, because when March 24, again, so from July 1st to December 31st of 2023, we received that data on that following March of 2024. But by then, we already knew there was an issue because we had staff out there back in September and October. So they are required to report that at least twice a year. And the other thing is when they have these issues, they're allowed up to 60 days to correct them without even telling us. They got to put it in those reports, but they don't have to tell us unless it exceeds 60 days. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of times we do rely on the public because we may go there and the records may look appropriate depending on the time frame, but if we get the complaints, that lets us know that something else is going on. And that's how we kind of knew what was going on here, because a lot of the complainants I talked to said that even though we got the complaints in September of 23, that the issues were going on before that. Well, we didn't know that because we didn't have any data. Staff had already been out there when everything was okay. And then now when we found out that we had the complaints, we went out there. We realized, okay, you know what? Now we're having these concentrations being higher. We come out there, we do the auditing. So we kind of rely on the public to let us know because we had no idea this was going on until those complaints began. But the data that they send us based on the time period does help, if I'm answering your question.
But our permit requires them to report twice a year any deviations from the permit, but also requires to certify annually they have been in compliance.
And this work that we're doing with landfills and doing the surface emission monitoring, that's something that Michigan is kind of right now like a national leader on, and we're doing a lot more of these audits to see how landfills are doing their surface emission monitoring, because we're kind of checking on them, because otherwise you kind of don't know unless you do it yourself. And when a lot of this stuff was happening that fall, we had like air quality inspectors from different parts of the state. Like we were all working on this, and enforcement was kind of on the outside, but technically we were pulling in a lot of other people to try to figure out, along with MMD, like, okay, how do we attack this? Like what information do we need? Because a lot of this work we're doing on landfills is kind of new. So we're learning a lot as we go too, and we're working more with MMD, and the rules have changed in like the last couple of years too. So there's a lot of like improvements happening on the regulatory front when it comes to gas management that EPA and the states are learning about.
And just to elaborate that further on what Janine mentioned is, so out of the 50 states, only 4 states, Michigan is one of 4 states that is doing these auditing at the landfill. So that's pretty good that we're kind of leading the way nationally in doing that, but by being more proactive rather than being reactive when these things come up.
You said you had a lot of questions, so let's let him ask a couple more questions, because it is almost going to be.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
You said that after you received these complaints, you guys had put some air monitoring out there, correct?
Yes.
Has the data shown from your air monitors shown improvement?
Well, it was a limited sampling study that was done. So it wasn't monitoring long-term. It was a sampling study to determine, is there an issue? And if there is, do we need to do more? So that limited sampling study, I don't even remember. I want to say it was done for 2 like 60-day periods. And we didn't determine that the kind of study that we were doing, that it warranted more of what we were doing. So it wasn't like monitoring everything, that it could possibly monitor. It was very specific. We were looking for things that could cause short-term or long-term health impacts.
And they were mostly southeast of the landfill, correct?
Actually, we put them on, we had a couple different locations, and then we moved them to try to, so we could kind of capture all the different sides of the landfill to look to see what was going on.
Because I'm northwest, and when I looked up at the positions online, none of them were northwest of the landfill. And that
Right.
might have been before they were moved, I don't know, but.
Yep, we did a couple different ones, so what's on there is, you know, what we ended up doing. And some of the reasons why we put the monitors or the samplers, because they were samplers, not monitors, a little different terminology, where they were was because of the topography of the landfill and how weather impacts. Even though it's a small mountain, that mountain still impacts weather patterns close to the ground, which is what we wanted to look at. So we wanted to look at what were the pollutants of concern in the breathing zone, not up here where like the wind is going to mostly be pushing things, but where you all are breathing the air. So that's why those positions, because as a layperson, you look and you're like, well, the weather normally comes from the southwest, the wind, so why wouldn't you put one here? And it's because of that we're looking at in the breathing zone, how that like very localized weather patterns are impacted by the hill of the landfill and how it is shaped. So I hear what you're saying. I know, like, logically, it's like, what?
Well, I was confused as to why you wouldn't just put them
yeah.
all the way around.
Right.
With that
It's
being
because
said,
we
you
only
know.
had limited ones that we could use to measure the specific pollutants, and so we wanted to maximize where we were putting them, and that we did use a computer model to kind of look at what would be the best place for those to capture the highest emissions based on cell 8 and all the other kind of data.
And again, the vast majority of the complaints we received were located to the southeast of the landfill and to the northeast. So that's probably why, if you said you're northwest, that's probably why they.
I have,
yeah.
but I have friends that, I mean, they didn't file the complaints, but they were smelling it too.
Yeah.
They had similar issues. I mean, maybe they weren't the ones calling, it wasn't right in their backyard.
No, we
Some people
definitely
are closer,
considered,
but.
it wasn't like we were like, Northwest, don't care. No, it wasn't. It was based on all the other data that we had, so. And that is, Janine's right, all of that is still on
Yeah, it's on
our
the
Smiths
on the
Creek
Smiths Creek
website. Not theirs, but.
On our EGLE website.
I do think the second, or when the locations were moved, I do think one of the monitors was more, it was on
That
the
way,
west side of the
yeah.
landfill, but more in the northern area of the west side, so that one might have data that you'd be more interested in.
Now, were they only on the landfill property, or did you guys
No,
put?
they were off the property.
Okay.
They were all off the property.
Okay.
It was to be able to look at what the community is experiencing, not what's on the landfill,
Right.
because those can be very different.
Right in people's yards? and-
Yep.
Okay. I guess, some people are concerned, my question is what happens after the fines, continued violations, kind of, what's the end game? I mean, I'm also concerned about the fact that this is state government and local government. It's county-owned, you guys are a state government entity, and it's just fines that we pay. I know some of it can be redistributed, put back into the community, but it still comes out of our pocket, and the part that is not redistributed is just gone to a fine that we wish we didn't have to pay. So, I mean, how long are they gonna get to play a game where we have this consent order and they violate and they get a fine, and then we get to the end and they do what they need to do, and then there's more violations, and like you said, you start it over again. And
Well,
it,
hopefully we won't have to do that, but, you know, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but my understanding is like the county has a certain pot of money for landfill operations, and that the fine will be paid from that. But I don't know, I don't work for the county, and I'm not sure, but I don't know, this is probably gonna upset some people, but like, when we do enforcement, there's a fine component. It's just part of our enforcement action to create that deterrent effect. And deterrent effect just means like, you know, we want to make sure that we send a message that this is, you know, unacceptable, like that you've got to invest in, you know, whatever business or county or individual, you've got to ensure that you're compliant with the law. And we don't take enforcement on the vast majority of violations across the state. But in this case, with everything that the community was facing and the violations that we observed, we had to refer them to escalated enforcement, and they have to pay a penalty. So,
Can I cut in real quick?
yeah.
So if, with what he's saying, if it's cheaper to just pay the fines than fix the problem, and they just continue to do that, like, where is the end game? How do you?
Right, you know,
Because that's what a lot of people do, they just
yeah,
continue to pay the
right,
fines.
and I've been doing this type of work since,
my
I don't
concern.
know, almost 26 years, and I don't have a good answer for that. I don't think this county's gonna do that, though. I mean, I can't predict the future, but I think because also as a municipality, I mean, they are, you know, they, obviously, there's a lot of concerning things that occurred here, but I think, hopefully that they'll be on the path to compliance. But we can't predict the future.
I just want to, are you saying that they won't fix the problem and just pay the fine? Because they'll be required to fix the problem. Is that what, that to answer your question?
So if you just continue, if they're just allowed to continue to be fined, and they pay the fine because it's cheaper, pay the fine and fix the problem.
Well, no, they got to fix
I
the
mean, they have
problem.
been fixing-
They'll have to fix the
They
problem,
also, like, we wouldn't be here tonight, because we're not gonna just, like, negotiate an agreement without knowing and having a good sense that the violator, the county, the business, whatever, is going to come back into compliance. So, I mean, they've already taken actions to correct the violations, and they're gonna continue to take actions to ensure they're in compliance, but we wouldn't be here if we didn't feel that they were already on the path to compliance. Because the $145,000 would not, they've already spent a significant amount of money fixing their problems, and they'll continue to spend a significant amount of money. We wouldn't have negotiated the penalty at that value, if you will, if we didn't have any good sense that they were gonna comply, because that penalty would, obviously, we'd want it to be significantly higher, too. So, we do take into account those things, like the actions that companies or counties take to come back into compliance.
So Bob, hold on, let him get through his, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I think we've kind of touched on this already a little bit, but are these fairly common landfill issues? Or is this a little bit more so than typical, or?
No, I mean, I think we've definitely had odor problems, gas emission problems at other landfills, and definitely some that have led to this kind of enforcement action. So it's not unique to Smiths Creek landfill. You know, not every landfill ends up in a consent order related to, you know, odorous gas emissions, but several have. So it's, you know, it's not totally uncommon. It's not unique to this site.
Okay. And we've talked about methane and H2S both, but we seem to talk about methane more. So this monitoring that they're going to put in is strictly just for methane?
It is. So we were looking at, for the perimeter monitoring plan, a couple things that we are considering is we want to make sure that we're capturing the gas. So there's one other perimeter monitoring system at another landfill in the state, and they're doing H2S and methane, but we've had a harder time with the H2S, capturing the H2S emissions, because they tend to be just based on that pollutant, they tend to like run in more narrower bands. So methane is a really good surrogate for both H2S and methane emissions. So we, in this case, are requiring the methane monitoring because we think that it will be effective at capturing both the H2S emissions and the methane. So if there is a problem at the landfill, the methane monitoring should be very effective. That's why we only required them to do the methane monitoring. But one thing about the perimeter monitoring plan is that it can be amended. So like if there are some changes that need to happen down the road, that may be something that we consider under the consent order, because we did add language that allows us to, if we,
Like if it's not working the
yeah,
way
we can seek
intend,
modifications to it.
I wouldn't mind seeing something like that. I mean, I know you say it sounds like there's a correlation and they kind of go a little bit hand in hand, but at the same time, you can't predict. And like you said, itself can kind of create its own weather patterns and this and that, and there might be a situation where you have overabundance in it, and it somehow travels differently or whatever the case may be. And for the people that live closer, I know it can cause more acute symptoms and it can come on quick. So I know it's something I'd like to see in there. We are getting close to the end, so don't worry. I know we've all been here a long time, but I definitely feel like this is very important because, like I said earlier, this has actually held up our plans in building, and so we'd really like to try and get this figured out. Now, the St. Clair County owns it, and then CTI is an engineering group that runs it.
They don't operate it, but they do like the design, a lot of the design work, so they're like an engineering consultant. I do think the county
And then
has
Blue
a-
Water Renewables has a hand in it?
I think they
too?
run the gas to energy facility.
Are they responsible for any of the fines from any of
No,
this?
No, they're not involved in this enforcement action.
Okay.
No, we only are, this is related to the landfill operations. It's not related to the gas and energy plant.
So even though they're connected, they have no liability, no
There are no violations
responsibility?
associated with their part of their plant, if you will.
So their equipment, everything is up to snuff, meeting
Mhm.
permit requirements, everything, okay.
And they're required to perform testing at that plant at least once a year at minimum, so that it keeps them in line, helps keep them in line.
Okay. And then we talked earlier about the 500 ppm. At what point above 500 ppm does it become a violation?
It's not, that requirement in the federal regulations, it's a violation if you're not taking the corrective actions to address that excursion, if you will. Yeah, so it's like,
So there's not a threshold amount? There's not like if you hit this number,
it's a
you're in
violation?
violation?
No, and that comes right from the Landfill Federal Clean Air Act.
That is an indication that something else is going wrong.
Yeah.
They have to figure out with the root cause analysis what is going wrong, and they have to fix that problem.
And then
Until
retest, and then
then
retest.
they redo the SEMS monitoring, and if it is below 500, it's okay. If it is above 500, they still have to figure out what's wrong.
So it's more like corrective actions and making improvements to the gas collection and control system.
And if an area fails at least 3 times within a quarter, they have to either expand the gas collection system by adding more wells, because that would mean that they're not able to capture all the methane. So you either got to expand the well field to capture that, or submit something as an alternative scenario for us to approve. So they just can't get away with it. They'll have to address it.
No, you said they have well field. Is it strictly just gas wells, or do they have, is there liquid water wells?
You mean for,
There's
I'm
gas-
just, my
there's-
main question is, how are they monitoring water and possible contamination?
Yeah, so.
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
No,
you're
you're
okay.
fine.
So of course, there's like gas wells to collect the gas, but there's also a system of monitoring wells. There's 15 monitoring wells, groundwater monitoring wells that surround the entire landfill. So both like hydrologically up gradient and down gradient. And then there's chemical constituents that they test for, and then all of those results are submitted to the department and then reviewed.
I'm assuming that's a large band of chemicals.
So this landfill in particular is, they have like site specific, so like they're looking at their leachate, site specific inorganic indicator parameters, then we're looking at heavy metals, and then primary and secondary volatile organic compounds.
What about like plastics, PFA, stuff like that?
So like, yes, so like right now, so Smiths Creek voluntarily did PFAS sampling back in 2019. All the results were non-detect. And if I remember correctly, they did 5 down gradient wells and 3 up gradient wells. And then at my last inspection, I was informed that earlier this month, they conducted another voluntary PFAS groundwater sampling event. So I'll be getting submitted those results.
Is this at different levels, different depths, or is it just surface?
No, so this is like groundwater. This is
Right.
the uppermost aquifer, and that occurs at 60, 70 feet below ground surface.
these are great questions. They are. They're good.
Well, I won't say where I work, but
Yeah.
I've dealt with some air permitting, and we deal with some solution
No,
mining and some
and-
Do
different
you
things.
two work
Just-
together?
I'm no expert by any means, but I have a little bit of idea. We deal with air permits and ground.
And I do want to clarify, like, as of now, like, there's no suggestion in the groundwater data that there's been any release into groundwater.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all I got. Thank you, guys.
All right,
Appreciate
no,
it.
thank
We
you, Tommy,
appreciate it.
appreciate it. I would love to wrap things up, unless, Bob, do you have one more thing?
Something short, I don't even need to go to the.
Okay.
thank you all for coming. We owe you guys gratitude for getting on this. I think we'd still be breathing bad air if it wasn't for you folk. I do appreciate it. And for the people that are concerned going forward, help me. Come to the county commission meetings. They're the first Thursday, third Thursday of the month. They're available online. Help me fight for you guys in clean air, because there's still indecision as to what to do going forward. So please get involved so that we can minimize risk to our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. So a couple of things. I know it's almost 9 o'clock, so I'll try to be really fast. This isn't like class where now bell rang and you all can run out. So give me a couple more minutes here. Just because I think it might help you going forward. So we talked about public comments. I did bring these cards. If you heard something today and you really want to make a comment in writing today, the good thing about doing it on these cards is I get all your information that I need to make it official. And then write it on the back. So what I like to say about public comments, and if you come next week, you'll hear the same thing. You are free to comment on anything in the consent order that you would like to. Some things are more likely to lead to changes. We talked a lot about those tonight. Some things aren't. Like, you can say we want to shut the landfill down. That's not something we're going to actually be able to do with the consent order. So just keep that in mind. So how can you submit an official comment? We have this great online portal called My Enviro Portal. If you don't like technology, don't worry about it. It's not a problem. You can also send us a letter if you'd like. You can send Jeff Rathman an email. You can write it on this. You can attend the hearing next Thursday. So you have pretty much any way that you would like to submit a comment, we'll do it. We will take it on a napkin. It literally doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if only Bob says the comment or if all of you say the comment. They're all weighed the same. So a lot of times people are like, well, if we comment more, it's more likely. It's not true. We kind of look at them more singularly by topic. Where to find other information? I know Alexis, thank you for standing at the table. She's one of our newer staff, so we're really happy to bring her with us tonight. Grab stuff on your way out if you would like to. This stuff is also on our public notice page. It's also at michigan.gov/EGLE Smiths Creek. So if you're looking on the Smiths Creek webpage, we talked a lot about where those sampling pieces of information are and a lot of other just updates. Also, you will get emails from me. If you don't want to, if I send you one and you really don't want me to send you anymore, just tell me to take you off the list, it's fine. But it's a really nice way for us to kind of keep you updated on what's going on. We only put a few people on this. If you want to get a hold of somebody, Jeff Rathman, as Janine mentioned, he is our normal enforcement specialist that's on this case. He wasn't able to be here with us tonight. But if he doesn't have an answer for you, he will get it to whatever one of the panelists can help you with that. So again, we'll share this presentation out with folks probably tomorrow, just so everybody knows that. Here is your QR code for all you tech-savvy people. If you would like to attend the public meeting next Thursday, so how that's going to be, you all will be experts at it because we're going to kind of do a little bit of the similar thing. Little short presentation for folks who weren't able to be here tonight. We'll do a short Q&A. It will be limited though, so this was nice to get to talk to you for a lot longer period of time than we'll have next week. Then we'll go into the hearing, and just as a reminder, hearing comments that are on the record, it's awkward because we don't respond to you. So we just listen and we just say thank you. Then your comment is officially on the record to be considered by our enforcement staff on the final consent order. So you don't have to register ahead of time for the meeting either. If you don't want to, you can just join at the time. But you'll see most of us there again, but we'll just be on the TV instead. Also, one other thing to mention, if you or someone you know does not have the internet, does not have a smartphone, can't participate virtually, the township is going to be hosting a broadcast here as well. So spread the word on that. Or if you just want to come hang out with your friends again, listen to us together, you can do that. Whatever works. And I think that is the end. So I did it before 9 o'clock. So thank you guys. Seriously. We don't mind doing this. We really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you. These questions, I was teasing you a little bit. They really were. Everybody had great questions, and we appreciate the opportunity to be able to come and have one-on-one face-to-face chat with you. So I know this is a lot out of your night, it's already dark, but it was kind of a crappy day, so I don't feel as bad.
I was just like, at 8 o'clock, the sun was, it was still light out. I'm like, look at that, it's almost
And then he's talking
June.
about it's cool, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Usually it would be warm, but not this weekend. So yeah, thank you guys, thank you everyone, and maybe see you virtually next week. We'll
Thank
put
you.
tomorrow if you want any
Thank you.
one-on-one.
What time is it?
It starts at 6 o'clock. Okay.
Great, guys, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.